Chapter 429. Invincible in the world? Invincible? Invincible? There was no word to describe the momentum of the Snowdance Corps' charge. The fire burst on the mountainside, and dense bullets poured out like a rainstorm. In the coalition forces of the three states, everyone, whether in the fire-flaming realm or the thunder-shocking realm, attacked without reservation. The attacks all over the sky turned into dazzling light and shadow. The 3,000 people were constantly decreasing, but the speed of the charge was getting faster and faster, like a wildfire wantonly invading on the front line, like a crazy tide rushing in the deep sea. The attack was like fire. The momentum was like thunder. The skybreaker. This was not like a troop at all. It was like a knife, a sword, full of killing intent. Pure. Overall. When Li Zhonghu, who had been rushing in front of the 3,000 people, stepped on the top of the mountain, and the Scarlet Star flag flew in his hand, the coalition forces of the three states standing in front of the phalanx began to retreat almost instinctively. 30,000 against 3,000. But the whole situation was completely reversed in an instant. It was impossible to describe the situation on the top of the mountain as a rout. The most vivid description should be collapse. The most complete collapse. The coalition forces, which were so dense that they could not see the edge at a glance, began to loosen the moment they came into contact with the Snowdance Corps. The sound of artillery and firearms seemed to stagnate for a moment. Boundless lightning and raging fire flew out from every corner of the battlefield, covering the whole battlefield. After the ice condensed, it exploded in all directions. The setting sun was like blood. Blood flowed like a river. On the top of the mountain at the junction of Oga State and Wulan State, a large scarlet and dazzling wave of blood suddenly rose. Corpses, limbs, skulls, and broken weapons condensed together. In the scene like Shura hell, the setting sun gradually shone in the sky, which seemed to be endless lightning. Frost and flames flew at the same time in the storm of surging power, with blood and death, turning into a cold but fanatical war picture. In less than 5 minutes, the coalition forces of 30,000 people were directly torn apart by the Snowdance Corps from the front. They were like wolves and demons. But in the end, this was an army, the most elite combat corps that was completely dedicated to killing and fighting. The 3,000 people gathered together was like a huge meat grinder. The meat grinder moved forward slowly, harvesting the lives of the coalition forces like harvesting crops. 10 minutes. The Allied forces were completely routed. The last afterglow of the sun shone on the hillside, and the entire mountaintop had turned completely blood-red. In everyone's sight, the scarlet-red star flag of Zhongzhou State was still fluttering, unusually frivolous. In the sight that had begun to shake, the faces of the soldiers of the 3 Eastern European countries were distorted. Some people threw away their guns and ran for their lives. Some of them cried out in pain with pale faces. Some of them knelt down subconsciously and raised their hands. At the same time, there were also people who seemed to have lost their minds and started shooting crazily. In the end, they even rushed forward. His body swayed slightly. The initial pain had already passed, and he was gradually becoming numb. He could no longer condense the raging fire in his hand. Chest, abdomen, shoulder, more than 10 bullets embedded in his body were becoming colder and colder. His body temperature dropped. With his last breath, he reached out and grabbed the epaulet on his shoulder. He took off the epaulet representing the rank of colonel in Zhongzhou State with trembling hands and handed it to his most trusted subordinate. The endless darkness in front of him seemed to be gradually eroding him, and the countless voices in his ears began to become chaotic. Leader! Leader! Old Zhang! You are not allowed to go over. Follow the rules of the battlefield. To the leader, countless chaotic voices seemed to ring in his ears, and then gradually faded away, getting farther and farther away from him. The Border Control Corps had the strictest battlefield discipline and detailed rules. The whole corps was based on the army. The 5 armies were based on the division. The division was based on the regimental headquarters. Going down layer by layer, it could be specific to the unit at the squad level. On the battlefield, no matter what combat establishment, when one's immediate superior died in battle, one was not allowed to collect the corpse. He was only allowed to carry the epaulet and average of the deceased. After the death of an officer, all subordinates must immediately be assigned to the establishment of the combat organization of the same level to continue fighting. No hesitation. No hesitation. This was the battlefield of the Border Control Corps. This was the war of the Border Control Corps. There were only 2 words for the Border Control Corps on the battlefield: fight or sacrifice. The living would continue to fight. The sacrificed would spread their flesh and blood on the battlefield. Only the epaulet would eventually return to the homeland. The epaulet left his palm. The colonel's vision became completely blurred. When the darkness surrounded him, he remembered the golden epaulet he had just worn on his shoulder, his wife and daughter at home, and Xianxia state. The darkness grew darker and darker, but everything on the battlefield suddenly became clear. The colonel burst out laughing. An incomparably intense flame suddenly ignited on his body. He closed his eyes, and his body was completely tense. In the horrified gaze of the coalition forces of the 3 countries, his body flew over like a cannonball. The power turned into a raging flame. Then it was the cruelest coverage. There was no sound of explosion, but a raging fire with the afterglow of life suddenly exploded. In countless desperate screams, it swallowed everything. The Border Control Corps was still moving forward, and no one even looked at it. The Border Control Corps was still moving forward, and no one even looked at it. From beginning to end, they had only one order: charge. The star flag in front of them was still fluttering. The former Thunderbolt Battalion of the Border Control Corps and now the Thunderbolt Division of the Snowdance Corps had no territory or land in their world, only the star flag. Where the star flag was fluttering, there would be no soldiers of the Thunderbolt Battalion, and there would be corpses of the Thunderbolt Battalion. The strongest elite corps of Xianxia state fell one after another, and the coalition forces of the 3 countries began to fall in batches. The 30,000 people seemed to have surrounded 3,000 people. But the whole scene looked like 30,000 people were completely crushed by 3,000 people. The whole battlefield became fragmented with the charge of the Snowdance Corps. In the center of the army formation, as the Snowdance Corps advanced, the torn army formation became more and more scattered. At the forefront of the Snowdance Corps, the fluttering star flag was about to completely break through the blockade of the 30,000 coalition forces. For the coalition forces, this was definitely an undignified defeat. But seeing that the Snowdance Corps had rushed over, everyone felt relieved. In front of the real army soul, everyone seemed to realize a fact. Dignity was far less important than living. The Snowdance Corps was about to break out of the coalition forces' blockade. All of a sudden, the star flag at the forefront suddenly stopped. Turn around. In an instant, the star flag, which was getting farther and farther away, began to get closer and closer. Li Zhonghu did not completely rush out of the army formation. Instead, when he approached the back of the army formation, he did not hesitate to turn around and rush back in another direction. The morale of the entire Snowdance Corps rose to the limit in an instant. Charge. Countercharge. The army formation, which had become extremely scattered, was instantly penetrated again. The coalition forces of the 3 Eastern European countries began to flee in panic. The first batch of deserters began to appear on the battlefield. There were more and more deserters. It was almost the time when the situation was hopeless. At the rear of the coalition forces, in the headquarters that Li Zhonghu had never reached, a dazzling flash of lightning suddenly covered 100 meters away. The experts of Wulan State, who had always been hiding in the army formation, finally took action. They were originally the force that laid the foundation of the overall situation. The high-level officials of the 3 countries all hoped to use ordinary troops to consume the strength of the Snowdance Corps and finally let the experts decide the victory. But now the strength of the Snowdance Corps had not been consumed too much, and the experts guarding the border could not sit still at all. 100 meters away, the dazzling and condensed lightning spread rapidly in the air and went straight to the star flag at the forefront of the Snowdance Corps. The one who took action was a lieutenant general of the military of Wulan State. As an expert who was infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm, he could be sure that Li Zhonghu was no match for him. Now that he had been preparing a full blow for a long time, It was almost no less than that of an ordinary half-step invincible realm expert. As long as he killed Li Zonghu with this blow, it would definitely be a huge setback for the Snowdance Corps. The lightning spread like a dragon. The figure of the Lieutenant General of Wulan State rushed up to the sky and arrived with the lightning. He clenched his fists slightly. The huge force, which was almost no less than the full blow of a half-step invincible realm expert, was surging and was about to completely cover Li Zonghu. The world suddenly became extremely quiet for a moment. The chaotic noise on the battlefield seemed to have suddenly gone away. The last light of the setting sun remained tenaciously in the sky. But in an instant, the whole sky seemed to become extremely dark. The pitch-black sky was faintly glowing, and the faint crackling sound suppressed the slaughter on the battlefield. The air gradually became messy under the dark sky. Hundreds of meters away, under the dark sky, General Yi of the Ninth Heaven of Zhongzhou State pulled the exaggeratedly huge bow in his hand. He bent the bow like a full moon. The bowstring was pulled to the limit in an instant. A flash of lightning appeared in Yi's hand. The lightning gathered into an arrow. The Lieutenant General of Wulan State, who was close to the half-step invincible realm, was less than 20 meters away from Li Zonghu. But under the pitch-black sky, these 20 meters looked like 20 li, keel, run. A hoarse voice suddenly rang out behind the Lieutenant General. A burst of extremely condensed killing intent locked on the Lieutenant General in an instant. The Lieutenant General subconsciously looked up at the sky. The sky changed slightly for a moment, and there was a touch of strange blue in the darkness. The Lieutenant General's pupils suddenly contracted. This was not the night. The pitch-black darkness that enveloped the sky was astonishingly the extremely dense lightning. The absolute blue continued to gather and eventually turned into dead darkness. The Lieutenant General struggled to turn his body. Whoosh! The sound of an arrow leaving the string suddenly passed through the entire battlefield. A dark blue arrow was already in front of the Lieutenant General the moment the sound rang out. Wherever the blue arrow passed, the dark sky completely collapsed, and the thunderbolts fell like a rainstorm, destroying everything. This arrow was shot at the Lieutenant General of Wulan State. But wherever the arrow passed, all the coalition forces of Wulan State were instantly turned into powder. There was no time to dodge. The blue arrow was like a blue light. As soon as the Lieutenant General moved for a moment, the arrow had shot directly into his chest. Boom! It was as if a bomb had exploded on the battlefield. The blue arrow passed through hundreds of meters of bow and arrow, smashed all the defenses of the Lieutenant General, and shot him directly into the air. The huge force obliterated his body and raged wildly around him. Wherever the blue light passed, no matter if it was an expert or a soldier, they were all crushed into pieces. The whole battlefield became extremely silent for a moment. The coalition forces of the three countries were slaughtered by the Snowdance Corps. None of the masters hiding in the back dared to make a move. That could be said to be an earth-shattering arrow. It represented too many things. Everyone thought of a legendary general in Zhongzhou State. There seemed to be only one master who used a bow in Zhongzhou State. Vermilion Bird, one of the four spirits. General of the Ninth Heaven, and the one in his hand was like a nightmare to the enemy. Is this the string of rainstorm? Lin Yuxian looked at the huge bow and arrow in Yi's hand, and his eyes were a little fiery. The string of rainstorm was one of the legendary four spirits' armors. It was as famous as the Azure Dragon armor of Gongsun Qi, the Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State, the Curtain of Night. The Curtain of Night was attached with the world's top optical camouflage ability. The biggest feature of the string of rainstorm was its deformation and energy aggregation. To some extent, this bow already had the prototype of a thermal weapon. He did not speak. His palms slightly relaxed for a moment, and the huge bow and arrow in his hand began to twist. Finally, it wrapped around his arm and spread all the way. It turned into a close-fitting suit of changing colors and clung tightly to him. "It's your turn." After Yi shot the arrow, he looked at Lin Yuxian and said calmly, "Black Tortoise will follow you with 2 groups of terracotta army." He reached out and pointed forward. On the hillside, the Snowdance Corps was still rushing and killing. He pointed to another direction that was chaotic but temporarily could not be affected by the Snowdance Corps. I choose there. Lin Yuxian shook his head and pointed to the left side of the coalition forces of the three countries. The middle side will be handed over to the Snowdance Corps, the right side to the Terracotta Army, and the left side to me. Yourself. Yi and Li Wangsheng frowned at the same time. Enough. Lin Yuxian smiled. The soft sword was straightened in his hand. He moved forward slowly, and his aura began to change gradually. His injuries from the battle with Gu Xingyun had not yet healed, but he had broken through from the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking Realm to the peak of the Thundershocking Realm, and his injuries had been completely suppressed. With a sword in hand, Lin Yuxian thought of the martial arts that Li Tianlan had told him before. Such martial arts had no choice, no so-called path, no light and darkness, and no reality and illusion. Martial arts was martial arts. His martial arts was swordsmanship. That was swordsmanship. The simplest martial arts, the simplest swordsmanship, were also the most difficult. Invincible martial arts, invincible swordsmanship. Such martial arts did not need a path, so there was no need to choose. Therefore, Lin Yuxian made up his mind when he broke through. He did not need to choose anything. He had his own swordsmanship, so he still chose the 24 moves of sword. Lin Yuxian's figure walked to the foot of the mountain. Countless coalition forces appeared in his sight. Lin Yuxian narrowed his eyes and relaxed. The crazy sword intent suddenly spread with him as the center. The taut soft sword swept across the grass. The sword intent gradually turned into a storm. He chose the 24 moves of sword. One day, it would become his own 24 moves of sword. Lin Yuxian clenched the hilt of the sword and suddenly spun. A violent storm suddenly rose at the foot of the mountain. The eighth blade, burning sky. Lin Yuxian's body spun wildly and rushed directly to the top of the mountain with the rotating sword light from the foot of the mountain. The storm turned into a hurricane. With a loud whistling sound that resounded throughout the battlefield, it came down from above. Lin Yuxian's figure had disappeared. The sword intent had disappeared. There was only a crazy and almost completely out of control storm left on the entire battlefield. Wherever the storm passed, boulders and grass rushed into the sky. The whole mountain trembled violently under the storm. The mountain was completely torn apart by the storm and began to collapse. Finally, it was swept into the storm. The entire mountain seemed to have flown up under this sword. This was just a sword, but it was like an eternal sword. The storm formed by the sword light tore the mountain peak and rushed into the crowd while the earth was shaking. Bloody rain and wind. It was just like what they had predicted. The charge of the Snowdance Corps. His arrow. His sword. This battle was enough. Wulan State, August 7th. At 4:50 p.m. The 30,000-strong coalition forces of Wulan State, Oga State, and Ra State encountered the 3,000 Snowdance Corps on the border of Wulan State. At 5:25 p.m., the 30,000-strong coalition forces completely lost their combat effectiveness and completely collapsed. In half an hour, the 3,000 Snowdance Corps went in and out of the 30,000-strong coalition forces 3 times and completely broke up the last trace of combat effectiveness of the coalition forces. At 5:40 p.m., the elites of the Snowdance Corps officially entered Wulan State and went straight to Reki City. And at this time, it had been 12 hours since Li Tianlan caused a great change in Reki City. I didn't update yesterday. I sent a leave notice. As expected, many people couldn't see it if I posted it there. I changed to a new computer. I was too late yesterday to work on the computer, so I didn't write it. The input method was gone. It was estimated that there would be a lot of typos recently, and it was the end of the year. There were a lot of things to do. I'll ask for leave as little as possible. I'll be fine after the Spring Festival. Chapter 430. Among the 4 major families in Eastern Europe, the Rekvia family was recognized as the weakest. It could only dominate the base camp in Eastern Europe, and its sphere of influence had always been difficult to go out of Eastern Europe. In contrast, the other 3 major families in Eastern Europe, Morton, Violet, and the Qin family may not be much stronger than Rekvia in Eastern Europe, but outside Eastern Europe, their strong capital would not be much weaker than theirs in Eastern Europe. The main reason for this embarrassing situation was that the Rekvia family did not have its own invincible realm expert. When the Polar Ground Alliance existed, as one of the four pillar families of the Polar Ground Alliance, Rekvia's shortcoming of lacking high-end combat power had been intentionally or unintentionally covered. With the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the most fatal flaw of the entire Rekvia was completely exposed in an instant. In such a state, the Rekvia family, in the eyes of enemies of the same level, was completely like a beast with a body but no sharp claws. The deterrent might still be there, but the overall combat effectiveness had fallen to the lowest point. The Morton family had its own invincible realm expert. The Violet family also had it. The Qin family also had it. The Rekvia family had what was known as the strongest war fortress in Eastern Europe, the Rekvia Castle. The entire Rekvia family built their castle at all costs. They used the most advanced scientific defense system to make up for the lack of an invincible realm expert in their family. From another point of view, in the heart of the Rekvia family, their castle should be equivalent to an invincible realm expert, at least not much worse. The most advanced defense system, the most accurate firepower coverage, and enough experts to maintain the operation of the castle, the entire Rekvia castle could be said to have almost no dead spots. This was the battlefield Li Tianlan chose. Maybe it was not the most perfect, but in Eastern Europe, in Wulan State, and in Reki City, this was already the best battlefield he could find. The Jiang family of South America would not retreat. Li Tianlan could only use everything in the castle to face Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. The entire castle trembled under the tremendous force. The moment Jiang Qiansong chose to move forward, the curtains of the stalemate were lifted. All the defense and offensive systems in the Rekvia castle began to run. From a distance, the entire castle seemed to be glowing. With a super high temperature, it was enough to destroy everything. Lasers shot out from all corners of the castle. Beams of changing colors intertwined into a light curtain, shining in front of the castle door. Jiang Qiansong was still moving forward. With him as the center, the space in front of the castle had completely solidified into an absolute defensive field. The field of the 30-meter mortal world became extremely dark around him, and the space completely condensed into a hole. In front of the castle, a precious energy was burning. The surging lasers kept hitting the solidified space. A large piece of the solidified space rippled like water, but there was no sign of it shattering. In terms of real combat power, Jiang Qiansong was not at the top of the divine list. But in terms of defense, he was definitely the best in the world. Forward. 30-meter mortal world, iron wall. Endless lasers shook the domain around Jiang Qiansong. Black Ghost followed Jiang Qiansong without leaving his side. The castle's main gate was getting closer and closer to them. Jiang Qiansong raised his head and stared at Li Tianlan, who was standing at the top of the castle. Li Tianlan lowered his head and calmly looked down at Jiang Qiansong. His body stood at the highest point of the castle, as steady as a rock. Another 5 meters. Watching Jiang Qiansong pushing the domain forward, Li Tianlan thought quietly. Another 5 meters. Looking at Li Tianlan above the castle, Jiang Qiansong was also thinking. 5 meters was very short. But in the countless destructive lasers flying, it was so long. The more he went forward, the more lasers there were, and the denser the frequency was. Jiang Qiansong, who was moving forward against the lasers, looked more and more serious. 30-meter mortal world was really close to 9 meters. The dark domain with a radius of 30 meters was constantly fluctuating under the impact of the lasers, looking vague and messy. Black Ghost's thick arm trembled slightly, and he held the black knife in his hand. A deep darkness comparable to the night continued to spread in his hands, and eventually covered his whole body. An extremely sharp and terrifying killing intent surged within the domain. 5 meters. This was also his best attack distance. Both were 5 meters. Forward. For meters. Jiang Qiansong's face became completely dignified. Black Ghost's figure was completely hidden in the dark knife light. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and took a step forward calmly. 3 meters. The breeze and drifting clouds of Sai City appeared above the castle. 2 meters. All the experts of the Rekvia family were ready. Jiang Qiansong took a deep breath. 1 meter. Li Tianlan suddenly took a step forward. 1 step, 1 meter. The moment the distance was shortened by him, the whole castle seemed to become extremely illusory. Jiang Qiansong's last step fell. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world suddenly expanded. 30-meter mortal world, moon in the mirror. The densest lasers fell on his domain. The expanded domain collapsed inwardly for a moment, and then swelled up again. The domain was moving forward. Countless lasers that fell on the domain bounced back to the castle at the same time. The castle really existed. But in everyone's perception, it seemed to have disappeared like an illusion. An illusory but clear sword intent blocked the way in front of the castle. The bounced laser passed through the sword intent. Li Tianlan's body suddenly shook. But the power in the domain and the power of the laser began to dissipate. After brewing for a long time, the long darkness rushed out of Jiang Qiansong's domain. In the incomparably arrogant roar, the darkness was like a knife. The light between heaven and earth completely converged with Black Ghost's knife. Black Ghost's long knife was raised high. In the almost lightless night, a pitch-black giant blade with a length of hundreds of meters suddenly appeared. The giant blade chopped down wildly. Cool breeze and drifting clouds. All the experts of the Rekvia family took action at the same time. The lasers were still shooting. Thunderbolts and flames soared in the air, with great power to meet the flash of knife light. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed again. He knew the result of this collision. But there was no time to remind anything. Large pieces of thunderbolts and flames were compatible with the knife light. The darkness spread all the way. The light was obliterated all the way in the dark knife light. Li Tianlan opened his mouth, but he only had time to say one word. Retreat. Boom. His voice was completely drowned out by the loud noise in an instant. The pitch-black giant blade in the air suddenly suppressed all the thunderbolts and flames, and the crazy knife directly slashed on the castle. This was a full blow by an invincible realm expert who gave up defense in order to pursue the strongest attack power. Black Ghost's strongest blow. This knife was called annihilation. Except for Jiang Qiansong, no one and nothing could stop this blow. Li Tianlan couldn't stop it. The castle couldn't stop it either. Boom. The dirt flew all over the sky, and a huge crack suddenly appeared on the front gate of the huge castle under the knife light. In the horrified eyes of countless people, the entire wall on one side of the castle was completely shattered by this knife. A quarter of the exquisite and strong castle defense was directly destroyed under this knife. The castle became ugly, and no one could care about it. The simplest question in front of everyone. The castle gate had been completely broken. Outside the door, there were 2 invincible realm experts of hostile forces standing at this time. This was the simplest question and the most fatal one. Jiang Qiansong's domain once again wrapped Black Ghost. He raised his head and glanced up. Li Tianlan still stood there, calm and collected. Jiang Qiansong smiled and said calmly, "I'm coming to kill you." Li Tianlan was in a trance. He still remembered what he said to Jiang Qianyan more than 10 hours ago. Then Jiang Qianyan died. And now, karma? Li Tianlan sneered. He didn't bother to think about the so-called karma. This was the current situation. He couldn't retreat. So even in the face of 2 invincible realm experts, the only thing he could do was to take action. Fight to the death. Chapter 431. No matter how advanced a dead thing was, it was not as good as a flexible expert. The gate of Rekvia's castle, known as the strongest war fortress in Eastern Europe, was completely shattered in a full charge by 2 invincible realm experts. Although such a situation was not a desperate situation, the pressure at that moment was like a dark cloud covering the sky, shrouding everyone's heart. It was still raining. The patter of rain swallowed the gloomy light. The sky gradually changed from day to night. The solemn atmosphere froze everyone's expression. From the top to the bottom of the castle, Everyone looked dignified. Tostel stood in the command room in the center of the castle, and his whole body was completely tense. As the usurper of the Rekvia family, this was the time when he was closest to success, but it was also the most dangerous time. All of this depended on the outcome between Li Tianlan and the Jiang family of South America. And the winner's final choice. All the weapons in the castle were ready. As Jiang Qiansong moved forward, the automatic system accurately locked Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. Jiang Qiansong moved forward slowly, his pace calm and relaxed. There were still experts of Rekvia who survived in front of the collapsed gate of the castle. As Jiang Qiansong moved forward, Rekvia's thundershocking realm experts and fire-flaming realm experts retreated in large numbers. Li Tianlan still stood at the top of the castle, squinting at this scene without saying a word. In the command room, Tostel took a deep breath and slowly said, "Fire." Jiang Qiansong could not move. He moved forward step by step. This was coercion. Li Tianlan could not move. Time was on his side, and he also had a lot of time to choose. But Tostel had to move. Standing here, he had no way out. He chose Li Tianlan and Zhongzhou State. Such a choice meant that he had to at least make some actions in line with his current position. He really didn't like the Jiang family of South America. Especially after the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, without the deterrence of the Invincible Realm, facing the ambitious Jiang family of South America, Rekvia could hardly see any living space in the future. Li Tianlan had a good chance of winning. Tostel firmly believed that. Fire. It was heavy and clear. He repeated it again. As long as he helped Li Tianlan win this victory, Rekvia would be on the big ship of Zhongzhou State. It would get more than just a chance to breathe. Perhaps it would be even more glorious in the future. Compared with being annexed by the Jiang family of South America, that prospect was definitely worth Tostel's fight. The Rekvia executives in the command room were still hesitating. Tostel, who had made up his mind, walked over and pressed the button to activate all the weapons in the castle. An ear-piercing alarm suddenly rang throughout the entire castle. Jiang Qiansong stepped into the castle. Lasers filled the sky and exploded in every corner of the castle. Boom! Creak! Amidst the dull sound, the entire huge ancient castle began to slowly change. The wall closest to Jiang Qiansong was shaking violently. The walls in all directions were slowly squeezed in by the flying lasers. The entire structure of the ancient castle began to slowly deform. After discarding some of the complicated but useless buildings, the entire ancient castle looked increasingly sharp and sinister. Li Tianlan watched all this quietly. His palm moved slowly. Falling stars gradually turned into a silver blade, and he held it tightly in his hand. The field of 30-meter mortal world opened up around Jiang Qiansong. Jiang Qiansong was expressionless as he threw a punch at the walls that were pressing in from all directions without hesitation. An earth-shattering explosion sounded without warning. The squeezed wall encountered a huge force and directly triggered the self-destruction system. The violent explosion stagnated for a moment outside the field of 30-meter mortal world, and then the intense fire completely swallowed Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. The raging fire madly impacted the field of 30-meter mortal world with the impact of the explosion. The moment the fire suddenly covered him, Jiang Qiansong raised his head subconsciously. In his sight, the place where Li Tianlan had stood was empty. Jiang Qiansong's heart sank slightly. The entire castle seemed to move completely at the moment of the explosion. The muzzles of lasers in all corners of the castle turned at the same time. Countless lasers gathered on a huge stone ball in the center of the castle. The stone ball, which seemed to be casually placed in the open air of the castle as a decoration, suddenly rotated in the convergence of the lasers. The converging lasers continued to intertwine and spread around the rotating stone ball, and eventually intertwined into a light curtain with a terrifying high temperature. All the light seemed to lose all its destructive power in the blink of an eye. But the high temperature continued to condense, sweeping everything around it. There was only high temperature. The terrifying extreme high temperature covered Jiang Qiansong's field before the sound of the explosion fell, and then rushed past the back of Jiang Qiansong's field. The light curtain continued to spread. Along the way, The field of 30-meter mortal world quickly melted away, and outside the field, half of the castle was completely shattered by this blow. The vast thunderbolt directly covered the moment the light curtain passed. Cool breeze and drifting cloud. All the masters of the Rekvia family made a full effort at the same time. This was the weakest time of the field of 30-meter mortal world. It was also the best time to hit Jiang Qiansong hard. No one expected that Rekvia's laser weapons would be so terrifying. Similarly, no one could expect that the self-destruction device in Rekvia's castle would have such a powerful destructive power. Even the Rekvia family itself did not expect it. This was known as the strongest war fortress in Eastern Europe. But since the establishment of the castle, it was the first time it had experienced the flames of war. All the laser weapons exhausted all the energy at one time, destroying half of the castle, but at the same time, it also suppressed Jiang Qiansong's field to the lowest point. The dim light of the 30-meter mortal world was in the soaring fire. The light and messy light curtain flickered constantly. Large thunderbolts immediately covered it. The light filled everything. In the chaotic light and shadow, Jiang Qiansong's angry roar suddenly sounded. The thunderbolts were spreading. The light curtain was spreading. The flickering 30-meter mortal world quietly blended into a dark blade light. The whole field seemed to become dark in the knife light. The darkness permeated the light curtain and kept twisting. 30-meter mortal world. Stealing the sky for changing the sun. Stealing the sky for changing the sun, borrowing strength and momentum. With Black Ghost's full cooperation, the dark knife light and the field of 30-meter mortal world were almost completely integrated together. Jiang Qiansong was strong in defense. Black Ghost was strong in attack. This style of stealing the sky for changing the sun was enough to fully combine all the advantages of the two. Such a power could even make Jiang Qiansong continuously advance several ranks on the divine list. The knife light and the field that were integrated into one broke out wildly. The space was completely broken in an instant. In the night that fell in a trance, a layer of gray ripples visible to the naked eye appeared in the space. The destructive explosion and the dense thunderbolts were all absorbed by the gray space ripples. It became a dark field that swept through all the destructive forces. The whole world appeared in front of Jiang Qiansong's eyes. But what appeared in front of him was not the castle. It was the most real world that was separated from the illusion. The most real, the quietest, the most vast, and the smallest. The whole world began to shrink in absolute silence. There was no sound, no scenery, and no night in the night. In a trance, misty, but extremely real world, there was only one sword light. The forever silent world. Jiang Qiansong remembered the final maneuver of Zhongzhou State. In the final maneuver, he had seen this style and had vaguely tried to capture that trace of sword intent. But at this moment, the forever silent world that appeared in front of him was completely different from what he had seen before. This style of forever silent world was actually just a starting move. The silver sword light was lifted up little by little in the absolutely quiet world. The sword light was extremely bright. But the sword edge seemed extremely heavy. Li Tianlan held the sword as if he was holding the whole world. This sword was not a sword that belonged to his martial arts. At least not before today. So when this sword appeared in front of Jiang Qiansong, he suddenly felt very familiar. This was the sword that Li Tianlan had been thinking about. He had not yet grasped the essence of this sword, so this sword was not the strongest. But it was the most suitable. This sword originated from Zhongzhou State's sword emperor, Wang Tianzong. It originated from his sword that set off a 10,000-meter sword intent at the intersection of the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean that day. This was a sword that he simulated in his constant thinking. He started with the forever silent world. The style. It was called the Long Rainbow. Chapter 432. Jiang Qiansong watched Li Tianlan draw the sword. The blade of falling stars shone with a sharpness that could dispel the night. The forever silent world started. This sword was neither fast nor slow. But it gave people a feeling that it could not be dodged. The world was silent. Extreme silence was nothingness. Nothingness was reality. The sword light on the blade of falling stars was also very real. It was a real boundless world. In the boundless illusory sword intent, everything was not relative. It was not relative to speed, nor was it relative to slow. That sword was there, fast or slow had no meaning. Only the most realistic and illusory sword seemed to exist eternally. The forever silent world, long rainbow. The long rainbow in the night was full of light for thousands of miles. The silver sword light enveloped the falling star's sword, swallowed Li Tianlan, and covered the castle. The extremely dazzling sword light became brighter and brighter. Jiang Qiansong's pupils lost Li Tianlan's shadow. The night came again after the absolutely dazzling light. The light still existed, but it was extremely condensed in an instant. The infinite light shrank together, getting brighter and brighter, but getting smaller and smaller. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. The whole world became a battlefield of light and darkness. Everything around seemed to have completely disappeared. A boundless light that seemed to cover the world finally completely condensed on the blade of falling stars. Jiang Qiansong's pupils suddenly contracted to the extreme. In the darkness, the dazzling and almost brilliant sword light began to extend. The light was extremely small, but the brightness was absolutely blazing. Li Tianlan, Jiang Qiansong, Black Ghost. Falling stars, 30-meter mortal world, dark sword light. Everything seemed to be connected by this extremely heavy and bright sword light. Speed, distance, even time, had completely lost its meaning. Jiang Qiansong quietly stared at the sword light in the darkness. He didn't know how long it had been. At the moment when the sword intent lit up, time no longer flowed relative, and speed no longer played a relative role. Everything was relative, and everything was not relative. This was Li Tianlan's full-strength sword in his peak state. Where the sword intent spread, it was not so much a domain, but a world. A world that made Jiang Qiansong completely strange. He couldn't adapt to the reality of this world. He still preferred the world that everyone knew. In the world that everyone lived in, time flowed relative to each other. Fast was faster than slow, slow was slower than fast. Light was rising relative to falling, darkness was rising relative to falling, forward was moving forward relative to retreating, and backward relative to advancing relative to retreating. Even if time was still, it was still relative to advancing and retreating. It was a world where all things were relative. At this moment, in the absolute silence of the void, an instant seemed like an eternity. Fast was slow, slow was fast. In the void, there were no living things and there were no opposites. Reality and illusion. So, was this sword real or just an illusion? Jiang Qiansong could not adapt to such a world. Therefore, when the sword light shone, when the sword light converged, when the sword light spread, from the beginning to the end, he did not react at all. If all things did not oppose each other, then any reaction would no longer have any meaning. Jiang Qiansong's eyes were in a trance. In absolute silence and nothingness, this sword strike had brought him terror. What was left was shock and a hint of indistinct understanding. What was a prodigy? Only those who had absolute dominance in an era could be called Heaven's chosen one. Those who could lead the progress of martial arts in an era could be called Heaven's chosen one. Hundreds of years ago, the prodigy ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai and the ancestor of the Lin clan shocked the world in their most glorious period. From that time on, the Dark World had the 4 realms of martial arts and the Invincible Realm. Today, hundreds of years later, in this sword strike, Jiang Qiansong vaguely seemed to see the possibility of surpassing the Invincible Realm. The darkness continued to spread. The sword light on the blade of falling stars began to spread forward. It did not bloom. The light was condensed to the extreme and spread straight. It was like a ray of light that broke the night curtain. A long rainbow. It was very small, but it was extremely brilliant and gorgeous. It was not a sword strike that covered everything. This sword was an extremely condensed point. The tiny light traversed the sky, tore the night curtain, and almost ignored the space. The sword light converged into a line and pierced the 30-meter mortal world domain filled with dark saber light. There was no difference between weak and strong. This was an absolutely condensed but very casual sword strike. It did not matter if it was pierced at any point, because he firmly believed in the sharpness of his sword strike. Indestructible. Indestructible. This was the first time since Li Tianlan had determined his path and achieved the basic level of martial arts that he used his sword with all his strength. He was unprecedentedly focused and dignified. At all costs, the great power moved forward with pure sword intent. Eternity was like a moment. Li Tianlan's body was stretched to the limit in an instant. The bones pulled the muscles, and the muscles tore the blood vessels. Blood came out of his body all over. A faint cracking sound seemed to ring in his body. Li Tianlan spat out a mouthful of blood, and a vein in his body that was difficult to grasp seemed to be unable to bear the force of this sword strike and broke inch by inch. The next moment, the brilliant sword light condensed to the extremes suddenly flew out and fell on Jiang Qiansong's domain. The domain in the darkness was silent for a moment. The expressions on the faces of Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost were completely frozen. In the next second, an earth-shattering noise suddenly resounded through the mountains and fields. The domain and the sword light were completely broken. The whole space completely collapsed and exploded. The empty and quiet void spread in the chaotic power. The 30-meter mortal world and the dark saber light disappeared completely. Only the light still existed, so real, so sharp. Forward. Forward with indomitable will. The light was like a column. From the light to a column of light. The sword intent had begun to disperse, but the residual power of this sword still carried a murderous aura that was enough to tear everything. This was a young edge that had never appeared in Zhongzhou State or even the entire Dark World for hundreds of years. A sword proud of the world. The residual power of the sword light was mighty. Black Ghost instinctively came to Jiang Qiansong's side. But he didn't stand in front of him. Instead, he hid behind Jiang Qiansong. Jiang Qiansong raised his arm. At this moment, almost all his defensive means were useless. Rekvia's castle burned all the energy to make the laser weapon burst out completely at one time. Countless masters attacked at the same time, and all the forces were obliterating his domain. At the moment when his domain was at its weakest, Li Tianlan directly drew his sword. Thousands of miles of rainbow. Even he could hardly react to the sword light that extended forward in an instant. He couldn't count on Black Ghost. Although Black Ghost was also in the invincible realm, he was in the invincible realm who gave up all the defense power. In the face of this sword, even if it was just the residual power, it was enough to kill him. The only thing Jiang Qiansong could do was barely raise his arm. He grasped a metal plate in his palm. The metal plate suddenly opened at the moment when the sword light pierced over, turning into a shield that could protect the vital parts of his upper body. The shield shone instantly in the face of the condensed sword light. Jiang Qiansong raised the shield to meet it. The sword light and the shield touched. What sounded was not the sound of collision, but a clear sound of breaking. The shield that could make Jiang Qiansong carry with him was almost completely torn apart by the sword light in an instant. The sword light, which was so subtle that it was hard to detect, passed through Jiang Qiansong's arm. Jiang Qiansong's body shook violently, and a large amount of blood burst out of his whole arm. Jiang Qiansong's face was a little pale, and his bloody arm trembled slightly. He raised his head and looked at Li Tianlan. Without the illumination of the sword light, Li Tianlan looked extremely illusory in the darkness. His face was also pale, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. But in a trance, Jiang Qiansong suddenly felt that Li Tianlan in this state was calmer than before. Li Tianlan took a step forward. His eyes were pure and focused. There was only the craziest killing intent. Jiang Qiansong took a deep breath and suddenly made up his mind. In the current situation, he had a lot of choices. For example, he suppressed Li Tianlan, let Black Ghost kill the masters of Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, and Rekvia, and finally killed Li Tianlan and recooperated with Rekvia. Or let Black Ghost collide with Li Tianlan, and he destroyed the entire castle by himself. Or, there were many possibilities. They were not easy, but there was a chance of success. But at this moment, Jiang Qiansong suddenly gave up all the plans. His eyes were a little annoyed, but he eventually calmed down and became very firm. Because things had come to this point, he suddenly found that many things were meaningless. Li Tianlan and the Jiang family of South America had a deep cause and effect. And Li Tianlan, not to mention the future, even now it was a little terrifying. Jiang Qiansong had a certain degree of certainty to win this game, but he and Black Ghost separated, but he had no certainty to keep Li Tianlan. If Li Tianlan was alive, even if the Jiang family of South America regained the right to cooperate with Rekvia and even won the chaos in Eastern Europe, what was the point? Of course, at that time, Li Tianlan might be very miserable. But Jiang Qiansong was not sure that Li Tianlan would die in that state. After all, there was Samsara Palace behind him. There were even a large number of forces in Zhongzhou state that supported him. Li Tianlan did not die. The future of the Jiang family of South America was the end of the world. This was the simplest logic. All the twists and turns in Jiang Qiansong's mind became clear and straight in an instant. He looked at Li Tianlan and spoke slowly. "Ague." Black Ghost responded and walked to Jiang Qiansong's side. "Come with me." Jiang Qiansong said in a low voice, "Kill him." This was Jiang Qiansong's decision. The interests after annexing the Rekvia family. The prospects after winning the chaos in Eastern Europe. Everything disappeared from Jiang Qiansong's mind at this moment. It did not matter. But at the moment, he had a more important goal. This trip to Eastern Europe, even if the Jiang family of South America would fail, or even get nothing in the end, it was acceptable. As long as he killed Li Tianlan, this would be the biggest gain of the Jiang family of South America's trip to Eastern Europe, even better than the cooperation with Rekvia. So at this moment, what Jiang Qiansong wanted was more than just victory. What he wanted most was Li Tianlan's life. At all costs. It's the Spring Festival recently, so the number of words in each chapter is very small. Even half a chapter at a time. There are too many things. It's normal after the annual meeting. Now write less. At present, if I can keep updating, I will be very satisfied. Chapter 433. Jiang Qiansong had used his own actions to prove what it meant to risk everything. In the deep night, the sword intent had not completely dispersed. The ruptured space was still spreading, and the space was filled with twisted dark ripples. The ripples still carried a destructive power, destroying everything in their path unscrupulously. Half of the castle had already collapsed. Light leaked out and shone in the darkness. In the chaotic brilliance, everything in the surroundings became extremely blurry. Jiang Qiansong's voice seemed to shatter in the distorted space. But Black Ghost, who was very close to him, clearly heard Jiang Qiansong's order. Without any hesitation, he raised the jet-black dagger in his hand. But Jiang Qiansong was faster than him. Before his voice died away, he had already pounced on Li Tianlan. At this moment, it seemed that all interests and prospects were not as important as killing Li Tianlan for Jiang Qiansong. Black Ghost followed closely behind. The two invincible realm experts charged at the same time. The saber light and the domain emanated in overwhelming pressure. Li Tianlan's expression was still calm, but under the illumination of the pervasive light of the domain, his face was strangely pale. No one knew what kind of price he had to pay for that 10,000 miles rainbow. Even Li Tianlan himself did not know whether such a sacrifice was good or bad. Thousands of miles of rainbow broke the domain maintained by Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost, and at the same time destroyed Jiang Qiansong's life-saving shield. The most powerful sword attack almost broke the dual wind and thunder veins in his body. The dual wind and thunder veins were still in his body, but the speed and strength he could exert had been greatly suppressed. It seemed to have returned to the standard of the normal wind and thunder veins. This wasn't a good thing. However, temporarily losing the dual wind and thunder veins meant that he had lost some of his speed and strength, but at the same time, his weakness of not being able to balance his strength, speed, and willpower was infinitely reduced. With the normal wind and thunder veins, Li Tianlan was calmer than before. However, this moment of calmness was completely shattered when Jiang Qiansong pounced over. The entire dark world knew that Jiang Qiansong was famous for his defense. But as an invincible realm expert on the divine list, No matter how bad his attack power was, it was still at the invincible realm level. The 30-meter mortal world condensed around him. Jiang Qiansong's speed was as fast as a phantom. Countless shadows suddenly filled Li Tianlan's sight. In Li Tianlan's eyes, Jiang Qiansong was still charging. The other party's tightly clenched fist had already smashed over. Jiang Qiansong's 30-meter mortal world was infinitely close to the real 30-meter mortal world. 9 zhang. Almost 30 meters. Jiang Qiansong punched out, and all the power belonging to the invincible realm poured wildly in the space with a radius of 30 meters. It was just like Li Tianlan's 10,000-mile rainbow. The pure 30-meter mortal world, which had shrunk to the extreme, was Jiang Qiansong's world. When he punched out, there was only power in his world. All the power erupted hysterically in the space within a radius of 30 meters. The mighty destructive power hit the edge of the domain and rolled back, repeating over and over again, tyrannical like a tide. In Jiang Qiansong's world, this punch was enough to destroy the world. 30-meter secular world, Armageddon. Li Tianlan had nowhere to retreat in the violent power that was like a storm and a wave. This was Jiang Qiansong's domain. The world was huge. But now, these 30 meters belonged to Jiang Qiansong, and it was also all that Li Tianlan could feel. He stepped forward. Forward. Li Tianlan's movements were extremely stretched, and the vibration of countless joints turned from a soft sound to a high sound, like a dragon. But he held the hilt of falling stars tightly in his hand. Dragon fist, azure dragon arrow. Shattering style. The unique skill of the Li family. His own martial arts. For a while, they were completely integrated. Only those who had really understood the Li family's inheritance and had their own martial arts could combine the two unique skills so perfectly. Dragon fist, azure dragon arrow. The beginning of Dragon Fist. This was the first move of the 72 styles of Dragon Fist. Under this punch, he sought the most fierce and penetrating power. And Li Tianlan's own shattering style also condensed the power into one point. In the domain of the 30-meter mortal world, he could not overturn Jiang Qiansong's world, but he could try his best to tear a gap that could let him breathe in this world with the slightest but most fierce sword intent. The night was extremely quiet. Li Tianlan stabbed forward with his sword. The moment the sword intent broke out, Jiang Qiansong's mighty punch with great power had directly smashed over. The violent power and the condensed sword intent surged at the same time within the range of tens of meters, but silently. The real battle of the invincible realm had long lost the gorgeous scene of surging flames when experts of the thunder-shocking realm fought. There was only the most direct, the most dangerous, and also the simplest collision. There was no sound, but it was earth-shattering in an instant. The fierce sword intent collided with the endless power domain. The space within 30 meters around Jiang Qiansong suddenly fluctuated violently. The air was constantly twisting. In a blur, everyone could vaguely see the shadows of Li Tianlan and Jiang Qiansong. Li Tianlan moved forward with his sword. Jiang Qiansong no longer clenched his fists. He put his palms together and calmly clamped the blade of Li Tianlan's sword with both hands. The sword intent gradually became sparse. But the violent power was still surging. It was like a confrontation or a stalemate for a moment. Li Tianlan held the blade tightly and stepped forward. Jiang Qiansong stepped forward at the same time. Boom! The sound of the space exploding suddenly sounded between the long sword and the palms put together. The flying sword intent and the power domain roaring like a storm were completely out of control in an instant. The entire domain that was flickering with a gloomy luster became completely clear in an instant. The condensed sword intent began to disappear. The domain had a clear shape. A faint wall of light suddenly appeared in front of Jiang Qiansong. The light wall pressed forward and covered Li Tianlan's body. Jiang Qiansong's body trembled slightly, and then he was motionless. Li Tianlan's body shook violently, and at the same time, his whole body flew backward for tens of meters and smashed into an open-air flower bed in the castle. The flower bed completely collapsed, and the branches, leaves, and flowers were crushed in the impact. Li Tianlan's body, which fell to the ground, moved. Before he could stand up, The black knife light had come across the sky and swept directly to his head. Jiang Qiansong strode forward. The invincible realm expert on the divine list, who was famous for his defense, was in an all-out offensive posture at this time. He and Black Ghost were on the left and right. They didn't even give Li Tianlan half a second to breathe. As soon as the attack ended, a more fierce attack had come. The black knife light was like a thunderbolt that tore the world apart, and the light with killing intent condensed into a round arc of light in the air. The arc of light went from top to bottom, and the knife cut directly to Li Tianlan. Jiang Qiansong's attack followed closely. His attack power was not as good as Black Ghost's, but his power was extremely heavy and steady, like a surging river, continuous and endless. Li Tianlan lay on the ground and seemed to glance at the dark knife light. The knife light cut down like thunder and cut through Li Tianlan's body, but it seemed to cut in the air. The blade swept through Li Tianlan's body. Li Tianlan's figure gradually became faint and became a shadow. His figure reappeared in the place where he had just fought with Jiang Qiansong. Blood flowed down from his body, but his essence, qi, and spirit were still strong and abundant. Black Ghost and Jiang Qiansong stopped for a moment and looked back at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at them. The scenery of this castle is very good. Jiang Qiansong said, "It's worth it for you to die here." At this time, he had completely set his goal on Li Tianlan, and he temporarily ignored everything in Eastern Europe. In such a state of mind, they had two invincible realm experts. This was an overwhelming advantage. Jiang Qiansong's heart calmed down again. He really couldn't think of any reason why Li Tianlan could not die. Li Tianlan was silent. The current situation was obvious. Jiang Qiansong's attack power was indeed not strong. He could take the opponent's full blow, and he was injured but not killed, which was enough to prove that the opponent's attack power was really nothing compared to his defense. It was difficult for Jiang Qiansong to kill Li Tianlan now alone. But it was even more impossible for Li Tianlan to kill him. Black Ghost's defense was very poor. His defense absolutely could not stop Li Tianlan's full blow. But in the same way, Li Tianlan could not stop Black Ghost's full blow. Neither one of these two invincible realm experts stood in front of Li Tianlan alone, and Li Tianlan would not be too embarrassed. It involved Jiang Qiansong. It was a fight to the death with Black Ghost. But if the two stood together, it was almost a fatal situation for Li Tianlan when their defense and attack were completely compensated. He couldn't beat them. He couldn't run away. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, and his eyes became colder. "How do you want to die?" Jiang Qiansong didn't want to delay time. As he spoke, he followed Black Ghost side by side again. Li Tianlan suddenly lowered his head. He raised his wrist and looked at the time. It was 6:40 p.m. When the sky in Zhongzhou State had just dimmed, Eastern Europe, which was also in summer, had ushered in the night. Li Tianlan laughed and said, "I want you to die first." Chapter 434. Jiang Qiansong keenly noticed that Li Tianlan was looking at his watch. His heart skipped a beat, but it wasn't because he realized something. Instead, he was a little confused. He couldn't figure out what reinforcements Li Tianlan could have under such circumstances. Li Tianlan's biggest reinforcement in Eastern Europe was undoubtedly the Samsara Palace. The headquarters of Samsara Palace was smashed by Wang Tianzong's sword. It was said that even the master of Samsara Palace had died, but Qin Weibai inexplicably got closer to the Lin clan. The Lin clan never entered the secular world. However, the super underground organizations that were truly powerful were all aware of the existence of such a colossus. Usually, no one would provoke the Lin clan. The Lin clan had never provoked others. But now, the mysterious patriarch of the Lin clan had followed Qin Weibai to Eastern Europe. This fact might have been well hidden at the beginning, but now, Lin Fengting's existence had already aroused the vigilance of all forces. At the same time, they were also vigilant against the Samsara Palace, which still had a lot of remnants. Since Lin Fengting followed Qin Weibai to Eastern Europe, he naturally had a reason to help Li Tianlan. But the problem was that it was impossible for Lin Fengting to appear here. Reki City was nearly 1,000 kilometers away from Mormons. Even if they flew over, It would take time. It was impossible for Lin Fengting. The two invincible realm experts of Sai City just left Reki City last night, and their whereabouts were unknown. It should be impossible. As for the Wang family of Beihai, from the standpoint of the entire Zhongzhou state, if Wang Tianzong appeared here, he would definitely help Li Tianlan under the gaze of the whole world. After all, some grievances could not be directly put on the table. But Wang Tianzong was not here either. Li Tianlan could only rely on himself and the team around him that was not weak but could not play a decisive role. Jiang Qiansong frowned slightly, thinking of Fireman and the two sword masters of Mount Shu. His eyes became a little gloomy. Kill him, Jiang Qiansong said coldly. Cool breeze and drifting cloud. Phantom Yin Yang. Fireman Li Tianlan. These 6 people together were indeed terrifying, but for Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost, 2 superiors of the invincible realm, they were not unkillable enemies. Jiang Qiansong only felt that it was a little troublesome. Since he could kill Li Tianlan now, why wait for his reinforcements? Black Ghost stepped forward. Jiang Qiansong also took a step forward. In their sight, Li Tianlan glanced at them, then turned around and rushed into the castle without hesitation. Jiang Qiansong was stunned for a moment. It seemed that at the beginning of the final battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago, Li Tianlan was no longer a nobody in the Dark World. After the final battle of Heaven Capital, Li Tianlan was pushed into the Divine List. After 3 years of traveling, he appeared in front of people again as a real highness. He was the commander of the Snowdance Corps, the Marshal. With such an identity and strength, few people in the entire Dark World could refute him if he said that Li Tianlan was a big shot. The entire Dark World was familiar with Li Tianlan. The impression that Li Tianlan left on the Dark World was it was his unyielding character. It was the kind of unyielding determination that seemed to always press forward without fear or hesitation. He had never stepped back in his life. This impression was too deep. So when Li Tianlan turned around and fled into the castle, Jiang Qiansong froze for a moment. A young man who was not yet in the invincible realm, facing the 2 invincible realm experts who joined hands to kill him at all costs. Running away was originally the most normal choice. But this choice appeared in Li Tianlan's body, which was so surprising and so not surprising. Li Tianlan did press forward. However, pressing forward with indomitable will was not stupid. Nobody would do something that would lead to death, and it would be a meaningless death. He was extremely fast. The moment he turned around, it seemed to be just 1 step, but he was instantly close to the remnants of the castle. Jiang Qiansong's stun time was also very short. Then he thought of the dense and endless advanced weapons in the Rekvia castle. That was also very troublesome. So looking at Li Tianlan running away, he rushed over without hesitation. Kill! A cold and determined roar sounded. In the deep night, before his voice had even fallen, the roar that filled everything had already directly pressed out from within the castle. Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost stood close together. The 30-meter mortal world lingered around the 2 of them, and the whole domain was like a light shield that completely surrounded the 2 of them. The huge bullets poured over like a rainstorm. In the Dark World, it was not easy to find a firearm that could threaten a thunder-shocking realm expert. But it was not difficult to find some powerful weapons that could threaten a thunder-shocking realm expert. The Destroyer series of weapons of Star State could be said to be the best among them. The Destroyer was not large among the weapons of the same level. Its length of nearly 20 meters was relatively easy to carry. It was not a firearm, but the latest model of rapid-fire cannon, with the special glass bullets of Star State. The cost of a Destroyer was as high as $70 million, equivalent to half of an F-35 fighter. The wealthy Rekvia family installed 10 of them in the castle at a time. What was more ironic was that these 10 destroyers were originally purchased by the Rekvia family through the arms channel of the Jiang family of South America. The bullets were like rain. Countless bullets made of special glass kept bursting outside Jiang Qiansong's domain. In the special production, glass was still glass. Extremely brittle, but with super penetrating power. This was a bullet specially developed to deal with martial arts masters. 10 destroyers opened the rapid-fire mode and fired at the same time. Not to mention a thunder-shocking realm expert, even an invincible realm expert would be extremely embarrassed. An invincible realm expert with poor defense like Black Ghost would find it difficult to survive in it. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world kept shaking and twisting and teetering, but it always existed tenaciously in the rain of bullets. Jiang Qiansong rushed straight forward. There was no detour, no dodge, and he went forward madly against the rainstorm of bullets. In the rain of bullets, he and Black Ghost's figures were close together, and they looked extremely determined. Li Tianlan was retreating. Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost were chasing. The distance between the two sides was always nearly 40 meters. This distance was outside the influence of Jiang Qiansong's domain. If he spread the domain, the effect would be reduced, and the restriction on Li Tianlan was not very big. At the same time, this distance was enough to avoid the automatic tracking and search of 10 destroyers. Li Tianlan could only run now. He had a lot of chips in his hand. He also had a great chance of winning. But now he had no time. 5 minutes. In 5 minutes at most, the current situation could be reversed. Li Tianlan had to use all means to delay the time. The castle, which almost occupied several hills, was huge, and there was a lot of space for activities. Li Tianlan wanted to run. The speed of the wind and thunder veins was enough for him to keep the current distance from Jiang Qiansong for 5 minutes. So although he looked embarrassed, he was not in a hurry. It was Jiang Qiansong who should be in a hurry. Jiang Qiansong was also not in a hurry. The Jiang family of South America used to be the closest partner of the Rekvia family. So he had been to this castle many times. Although the castle was very big, he had come here many times, and he probably knew most of the terrain. Li Tianlan was waiting. Jiang Qiansong was also waiting. He was waiting for Li Tianlan to run to a real desperate situation, and then it would be the real killing blow. The terrain he needed was not far from them. As long as he turned 2 more corners ahead, he would reach a relatively narrow passage. That was where he needed to be. Running, chasing, fleeing, turning again. 2 sharp turns in a row. The 10 destroyers' locks suddenly stopped for a moment. Jiang Qiansong, who had been waiting for this opportunity, suddenly opened his domain. The domain spread wildly from a distance of 30 meters. It instantly covered Li Tianlan and continued to spread forward. The domain was like a blade, instantly spreading out 100 meters. Li Tianlan looked back quickly. In his sight, Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost had changed their positions. Black Ghost in front. Jiang Qiansong was behind him. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly shook. He suddenly found that the territory that Jiang Qiansong had spread out had been separated from him, but was connected to Black Ghost. Black Ghost raised the knife in his hand. The saber light was as black as ink. At this moment, Black Ghost and Jiang Qiansong's breaths were connected. Black Ghost's knife was as long as Jiang Qiansong's domain was. 30-meter mortal world. Crossing the sea by deception. In the 30-meter mortal world, one could borrow the power of others and use it for oneself. He could also lend his strength to others to deceive them. Jiang Qiansong's domain, which had spread to 100 meters, posed no threat to Li Tianlan. But Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost's breath were connected, and Black Ghost's 100-meter-long knife light was the last thing Li Tianlan wanted to face. Without a doubt, this was the real killing blow. It was a sure kill strike. Chapter 435. This was the first time in Li Tianlan's life that he had clearly smelled death. More than 3 years ago, he had died once in Heaven Capital. But at that time, the sword of the woman in white was too fast, like a flash of flowing light. The moment the light lit up, with the sword intent exploding all over the sky, the blade had pierced his heart. Because it was too fast, there was no way to react. Black Ghost's knife was also very fast. But more of it was indescribable madness and barbarism. Li Tianlan had seen such a knife for the first time. Or it was the first time he had seen such a domain. The knife light and the domain were completely integrated, and the ultimate essence was the power to destroy everything. Such power, in Li Tianlan's view, was infinitely close to perfection. People in the dark world knew that Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost were a perfect combination. Even if it was not absolutely perfect, at least it was infinitely close. At the moment of life and death, Li Tianlan's eyes flashed a thoughtful color. He could no longer see Black Ghost or Jiang Qiansong. The obscure light of the 30-meter mortal world combined with the dark knife light. In the long and narrow space of the castle, there was a darkness far thicker and deeper than the night. The darkness covered the entire passage and began to rotate with the crazy killing intent. Crack, boom! In the loud noise of the collapse of the sky and the cracking of the earth, as the darkness began to rotate, the castle in the area of hundreds of meters suddenly exploded in the knife light. The 3 nearby destroyers were completely extinguished at the first time. The slightly inexperienced darkness flowed and rotated in the space, faster and faster. The extremely condensed killing intent locked on Li Tianlan. In Li Tianlan's sight, the long and narrow passage disappeared completely in an instant. The sound of the castle exploding in the area of hundreds of meters rumbled. Gravel collapsed, blood splashed, smoke and dust rose. The darkness in the empty castle was rotating, and a madly rotating vortex appeared between heaven and earth. The vortex roared and rotated, swallowing everything, covering the dark night sky, and suppressing the entire castle from top to bottom. Li Tianlan had no space to dodge at all. He couldn't tell whether it was knife light or the domain. It could only be called power. The domain and the knife light blended together, which was the combination of defense and attack. This madly rotating vortex was a millstone that was enough to obliterate everything in a second, and it could change into an unbreakable wall at any time in the next second. Li Tianlan had no possibility to avoid Black Ghost's knife. Defense and attack were the 2 sides of light and darkness. This power was so subtle and grand, like reality and illusion. However, being infinitely close to perfection was still not true perfection. The saber light brought with it the might of heaven and earth as it descended. It was like an undercurrent that could devour everything. The undercurrent was filled with incomparably fierce hurricanes. The silver sword gleam lit up in the black tide that was surging with hurricanes. Blood gushed out of Li Tianlan's body almost in an instant. But the blade of falling stars was still stable. The sword light was still bright. There was wind everywhere in the black tide. Every wisp of wind was a fatal edge. Li Tianlan raised falling stars. Sea splitter, punishing heaven form, shattering form, space-rending stance. The mountains and rivers were silent forever. Shadow formula, desperate pursuit. All the unique skills burst out from Li Tianlan in an instant. Black tide, he thrust his sword forward. But it wasn't an attack. Instead, it was avoidance. Using every means possible to evade. At this moment, Black Ghost's breath was connected with Jiang Qiansong's, and his strength was enough to rank in the top 10 on the divine list. For Li Tianlan, this was an invincible opponent. He was no match for Black Ghost. But this did not mean that he would definitely die in this blow. No one understood his martial arts. Except for himself. All-embracing collection. The changed 24 moves of sword was ethereal and fierce. This was the unique skill of the purgatory of heaven capital, but in Li Tianlan's eyes, it was the 24 moves of sword. A move that simulated sword intent. There were more and more unique skills in the black tide. Wherever the silver edge passed, the sword intent flew and spread, and was finally carved in every corner of the black tide. Sword intent of Mount Shu. Sword intent of Jade Pool. Sword intent of Jifeng Sword Raining School. The knife of Wuji Palace. There were even several styles of Sword of Emperor Path and Sword of King Path in the Wang family of Beihai. A light and shadow appeared in front of Li Tianlan. The light and shadow rotated around him and suddenly turned into a sword wheel. This was the 8th Supreme Sword Dance of Kunlun City. Countless unique skills were simulated by him. There was no doubt that the simulated sword intent that was constantly carved in the black tide was not really elite. But each move was full of charm. Jiang Qiansong, who was always less than 2 meters away from Black Ghost, frowned slightly. He suddenly felt that this scene seemed a little familiar. As if he had seen it somewhere. Where had he seen it? While thinking, The black tide was surging. Li Tianlan's silver sword light went straight forward. The black tide that pervaded everything pressed down overwhelmingly. The killing intent was endless. Li Tianlan finally carved the last sword intent in the black tide. This sword intent was not a simulation. It was his own unique skill. Whether it was the essence or the abyss, it was perfect. The forever silent world. In the silent nothingness, Li Tianlan once again started with the forever silent world and raised the sword edge in his hand. The falling stars burst out the light that pierced the black tide in an instant. Jiang Qiansong finally remembered where he had seen this move. That was many years ago. On the border between Zhongzhou State and Annan State. On the battlefield of the treason case. He opened his mouth, but he didn't have time to speak. He started with the forever silent world. 21st Blade Shatter of Land. In the 24 moves of sword, it was known as the absolute sword that broke the domain of the world. With this sword as the core, the sword intent that Li Tianlan had just simulated suddenly burst out and spread. The whole black tide twisted wildly. There was no loud noise on the twisted battlefield. But the constant collision of swords and knives resounded densely between heaven and earth. No one in the castle could intervene in this battle. Even cool breeze and drifting cloud couldn't get close to the battlefield. This was a real fight to the death. A battle that belonged only to Li Tianlan. The collision of gold and iron kept ringing. Some weak-willed elites in the castle vomited blood and fainted on the spot in the harsh friction and collision sound. The collision sound became more and more intense. The sound came out of the domain, which meant that the domain had begun to loosen. The black tide began to condense in the loosening. Innumerable darkness spread out and eventually disappeared. But a small amount of darkness condensed and turned into an incomparably deep knife. Black Ghost swept his knife. A dark knife shadow of tens of meters long appeared between heaven and earth. The moment the knife shadow appeared, it had begun to collapse. But Li Tianlan, who still maintained the action of drawing the sword, was shocked. His whole body flew out directly and fell hard in a ruin dozens of meters away. His figure moved, and his face became extremely pale in an instant. Blood gushed out from all over his body. Every corner of Li Tianlan's body was covered with knife wounds. Especially in his abdomen and back, 2 shocking knife wounds almost completely tore his body apart. Blood gushed out of the knife, and the bones inside his body could be vaguely seen. The most important thing was that with the massive blood loss in his body, the natural healing effect of the potion was weakening. The serious injury he suffered in the battle with Jiang Chenyan not long ago was about to break out completely. In a worsening situation, Li Tianlan chuckled. But Jiang Qiansong's face grew gloomier. The move just now was enough to kill Li Tianlan, but in the end, it only left him with a serious injury. There were too many problems in it. His breath was connected with Jiang Qiansong's. The absolute balance of defense and offense was infinitely close to perfection. Li Tianlan didn't die under such a move. This could only mean that the level of the opponent's sword intent was still above their joint attack. Wasn't it the real perfection that was infinitely close to perfection? Or rather, the real chosen one? The corner of Jiang Qiansong's mouth twitched. He opened his mouth and said, "Kill, who do you want to kill?" A clear and peaceful voice suddenly interrupted Jiang Qiansong's words. He spoke in perfect Chinese. Jiang Qiansong's pupils contracted instantly, and he suddenly turned around. A little sharp sword light appeared in his sight. There was only a little sword light. But the sword energy was overwhelming in an instant. In Jiang Qiansong's eyes, there was only the tip of the sword shining with sword light. This was a sword that completely turned all the power into sword intent. Wherever the sword light passed, there was only sharpness. Jiang Qiansong recognized this section of the sword edge in an instant. This was a famous sword that was famous throughout the Dark World. Its fame was not inferior to Listen to the Sea in the hands of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. Famous sword, sharpness. Recognizing this sword, Jiang Qiansong naturally recognized the owner of this sword. Qin Shilai. An indescribable feeling welled up in Jiang Qiansong's heart. His expression suddenly twisted, and he gnashed his teeth and uttered a name that was enough to shock Eastern Europe. Qin Shilai, Dark Sword Master of Eastern Europe. He was the younger brother of Qin Dongchao, the patriarch of the Qin clan in Eastern Europe. He ranked first on the holy list of the Dark World. He was indeed not on the divine list, because Li Tianlan was still on the divine list. It's 11:59 p.m., New Year's Eve. Spring Festival is coming soon. So I wish everyone a Happy New Year's Eve, Happy New Year. Last minute notice. I'll be taking leave for the next 2 days. I'll be visiting a lot of relatives and even staying in my hometown, so I really can't write anymore. I should be able to resume updating on the 3rd day of Chinese New Year. I want to say a lot of things, to explain and to feel emotional, but I don't have enough words. If I write more, I'll have to spend more money. That was all for now. Chapter 436. Jiang Qiansong thought of many possibilities. The moment Li Tianlan looked down at his watch, he was sure that the other side would have reinforcements. As the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Qiansong did not like trouble or variables. When his side had the absolute advantage, he almost didn't waste any time. From the beginning, his plan was to crush Li Tianlan with the combat capability of 2 invincible realm experts. The lion hunts the rabbit, the monarch descends upon the world. Jiang Qiansong did not expect that Li Tianlan could still barely withstand the full attack of him and Black Ghost. He also did not expect that Li Tianlan's reinforcements would be Qin Shilai. Why Qin Shilai? How could it be Qin Shilai? The Dark Sword Master was a big shot in Eastern Europe. He was a major character in the entire Qin clan. Since his sword appeared here, there was no doubt that the Qin clan of Eastern Europe had begun to pay attention to this place. The 4 major families in Eastern Europe, Violet, Morton, Qin clan, and Rekvia. Rekvia was recognized as the weakest of the 4 major families. As for which of the 4 great clans was the strongest, different people had different opinions. In the hearts of Eastern Europeans, the Violet family was naturally the leader of the 4 major families. This top wealthy family rooted in snow country could almost be said to have taken the entire snow country as its own foundation. In particular, in the past 100 years, the president and prime minister of snow country had strong violet colors. All the oligarchs in snow country had to bow their heads in the shadow of the Violet family. With such influence, it was naturally the strongest. It was the world's top military, financial, media, and energy giant. In the hearts of all Europeans, the strength of the Morton family was not necessarily worse than that of the Violet family. It was indeed difficult for the Morton family to compare with the Violet family in snow country, but its influence in Eastern Europe was unparalleled. The patriarch of the Morton family was even the only strong man in the world who could talk and laugh in front of the patriarchs of the Eastern Church and the Vatican. Moreover, when the Polar Ground Alliance existed, the tyrant was notoriously willing to listen to the command of the Morton family. The Morton family in Eastern Europe was the first wealthy family to propose the establishment of the Polar Ground Alliance. In the eyes of the people of the Dark World, the Qin clan was truly unfathomable. Because the people in the Dark World could see things that many people couldn't see or deliberately ignored. That was the skin color of the Qin clan. The Qin clan were all Chinese. A Chinese family was able to develop into one of the 4 major families in Eastern Europe, which was extremely xenophobic and valiant. This in itself showed their unfathomable heritage. The level of a wealthy family was different from that of a martial artist. There were no clear levels. But in the hearts of the people in the Dark World, the Wang family of Beihai and the Jiang family of South America were the top superpowers. Among the 4 major families in Eastern Europe, the Qin clan had been infinitely close to this level at its peak many years ago. Later, although its strength had shrunk, the current Qin clan was still only 1 step away from the level of the Wang family of Beihai and the Jiang family of South America. Therefore, in the Dark World, the mysterious Violet, the powerful Morton, and the powerful Rekvia were not as deterrent as the low-key and silent Qin clan. The Qin clan was special in Eastern Europe, and Qin Shilai was also special in the Dark World. For hundreds of years, The martial arts in the Dark World had been dominated by the sword. Swordsmanship was extremely prosperous, and there were countless masters. In the past 2 decades, Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou State could be said to be at the peak of swordsmanship and martial arts in this era. But Qin Shilai was known as the Dark Sword Master, Sword Emperor and Sword Saint. In comparison, this form of address was a complete insult. But Qin Shilai, who had just entered the invincible realm, accepted it calmly. Then he took the famous sword, Sharpness, of the Qin clan and went directly to Mount Dibing to challenge Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong. Although Qin Shilai was defeated, he escaped unscathed. So that year, Qin Shilai, who had just entered the invincible realm, directly rushed into the top 10 of the holy list. 8 years ago, Qin Shilai, the Dark Sword Master, went to Mount Dibing again. Sharpness versus Listen to the Sea. The Sword Emperor won. Qin Shilai still escaped unscathed. 3 years ago, the Sword Sage went to Mount Dibing for 3 times. He was defeated again, but he escaped unscathed again. Qin Shilai was now the first on the holy list, and Wang Tianzong was the first on the divine list many years ago. The gap between the two was like a chasm. No one thought that Qin Shilai had the strength to escape unscathed in front of Wang Tianzong. Even if Qin Shilai was at his peak, he might not be able to make Wang Tianzong draw his sword. Wang Tianzong was willing to draw his sword and fight with him, which could only show that the Qin clan and the Wang family of Beihai had a relationship. The Jiang family of South America had been cooperating with the Rekvia family in recent years. Therefore, Jiang Qiansong once paid close attention to this issue. But the Jiang family of South America investigated a lot of things, but found nothing. In the end, all clues pointed to the Wang family of Beihai, the Lin clan, and the Qin clan. The Qin clan seemed to have some relationship with the Wang family and the Lin clan. As a result, in some games between the Lin clan and the Wang family, in order not to hurt the harmony, they usually regarded the Qin clan as an extremely advantageous bargaining chip. The relationship between the Lin clan and the Qin clan seemed to be a little subtle. They were not enemies, but they had not been friendly for many years. On the contrary, the Qin clan and the Wang family of Beihai were more harmonious. The Jiang family of South America had always thought that the Qin clan would be the most powerful partner of the Wang family of Beihai in Eastern Europe. But why was Qin Shilai on Li Tianlan's side now? Or was the Qin clan on Zhongzhou State's side? Jiang Qiansong suddenly felt something in his heart and looked around subconsciously. It was quiet around the dilapidated castle. The faint sword intent was still surging. The fire was still burning. But in silence, one figure after another had appeared in the silent night. 5 people in a group. The various teams silently appeared near the castle, motionless in the night. They were so quiet that Jiang Qiansong, who focused on Qin Shilai, completely ignored their existence. The quieter they were, the more powerful they were. Jiang Qiansong's heart suddenly became a little cold. Qin Shilai was already standing beside Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's face was pale, but his eyes were still sharp, and his spirit seemed to be still at its peak. He looked into Qin Shilai's eyes and said slowly, "You're a minute late. I was in a hurry on the way, and I'm not familiar with them. There's an error in time." Qin Shilai pointed to the figure in the dark. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He turned his eyes to Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. In his heart, he still replayed the joint attack of Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. It was so perfect and so powerful. The ubiquitous power pushed him to the edge of death. In that kind of suffocating pressure, Li Tianlan felt only humiliation and fear, the fear of death. His heart was beating wildly, and the muscles of his body tightened a little to suppress the wound. "What do you say now?" Li Tianlan asked. "I can't stand Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost. They can't stand it either." Qin Shilai's tone was calm. "You don't have to." There was a trace of red light in Li Tianlan's eyes, which looked extremely strange. He pointed to Black Ghost and said, "Leave him to me." As he spoke, his body straightened up little by little. A kind of madness that almost tore everything came out of his eyes. The blood flowed along his body, with sword intent and unparalleled sharpness. Qin Shilai frowned. Before he could speak, Jiang Qiansong had suddenly turned back. Who are they? He pointed to groups of figures in the dark night that were as silent as statues and asked in a low voice. He knew the super force of the Qin clan. But there was no sign of the Qin clan's super force being mobilized at present, and the Qin clan's troops could not have such a terrifying and silent aura. These people who appeared near the castle in the night were no less than the heaven punishment troop of the Wang family of Beihai in terms of momentum and aura. The Qin clan could not afford such a troop at present. Qin Shilai glanced at them, and his eyes were also a little dazed. In his memory, this seemed to be the first time in nearly 100 years that the Qin clan had mobilized this troop. This meant that many things would change greatly from tonight onwards. Let me introduce them. Qin Shilai's tone was indifferent, and he said unhurriedly, the Qin clan, Xianyuan sword. Qin clan? Xianyuan sword? Jiang Qiansong's mind suddenly seemed to realize something, but he couldn't accurately grasp it. His mind was immediately occupied by the Xianyuan sword. The Xianyuan sword. The Lin clan's super troop. This was an absolute elite force that could compete with the heaven punishment troop of the Wang family of Beihai. For them to appear here, could it be the Lin clan had entered the secular world? However, why did the Xianyuan sword become the Qin clan's Xianyuan sword? Jiang Qiansong opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. You want to know why we didn't choose the Wang family of Beihai, but chose the Samsara Palace and His Highness Li Tianlan? Qin Shilai laughed. Li Tianlan seemed to be very concerned about this issue, and his ears moved slightly. The relationship between the Qin clan in Eastern Europe and the Wang family of Beihai was not a secret. Qin Shilai came to Dibbing Mountain 3 times and retreated 3 times, which was enough to explain a lot of problems. This time, he chose to cooperate with the Samsara Palace instead of the Wang family of Beihai. Li Tianlan still didn't know why. Because of a note. It seemed to be an explanation to Jiang Qiansong, but in fact, it was an explanation to Li Tianlan. Qin Shilai took out a note from his arms and handed it to Li Tianlan. The note was folded very carefully. It was very small. The handwriting on it was also very simple. There was only one sentence. We're all a family. Come back. It was a simple word. But the handwriting was not simple. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. This was Lin Fengting's handwriting. They were all a family? They were all a family? Your Highness, don't you understand? Qin Shilai whispered, think about the development model of the Lin clan. Time has annihilated many facts. For example, the guy in front of me asked the Jiang family of South America to check a lot of information about the Qin clan, the Lin clan, and the Wang family of Beihai, but they found nothing. Because some things are really too long ago, so long ago that all the clues have disappeared. But the truth is the truth. Qin Shilai said calmly, the Qin clan was a branch of the Lin clan many years ago. And it was the first branch of the Lin clan. Happy New Year, everyone, I'm back. Chapter 437. As the heir of the Li family, who was inextricably linked to the Lin clan, it was impossible for Li Tianlan not to know the history of the Lin clan. But if he traced back to the source, it had been too long. Without reading the extremely secretive genealogy kept by the Lin clan, it was also impossible for him to know what branches the Lin clan had. The Qin clan in Eastern Europe. This super wealthy family, which was not far from the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan in terms of scale and strength, was it a branch of the Lin clan? And it was the first branch. This meant that they were the first people to come out of the Lin clan in Switzerland after the establishment of the Lin clan. It also meant this was the direct descendant of the founder of Zhuanyuantai. If this was true, then no matter what the surname of the Qin clan was, it was indeed a family with the Lin clan. The Lin clan. The Qin clan. Li Tianlan's heart was in turmoil. The Lin clan had been in seclusion for a long time. This time, it extended its hand to Eastern Europe with the help of the Qin clan. How big a wave would this behemoth that had lived in seclusion in Switzerland for hundreds of years cause? It's impossible. Jiang Qiansong seemed to be the most affected. His face was completely distorted in an instant, becoming extremely terrifying, with a touch of unwillingness to fail at the verge of success. This was an extremely wonderful and complicated expression with rich meanings. Jiang Qiansong pointed at Qin Shilai and Li Tianlan. His face turned livid, then purple-red, and finally black-red. His fingers pointed forward with great force. In an exasperated tone, as his fingers moved forward, what was driven was the dark knife light that was condensed and calm to the extreme. Black Ghost stood beside Jiang Qiansong and was completely silent. The power that was infinitely close to perfection surged in front of Jiang Qiansong, impacting everything. 30-meter mortal world, stealing the sky for changing the sun. The move that almost forced Li Tianlan into a desperate situation just now was called crossing the sea by deception. It was Jiang Qiansong who lent his strength to Black Ghost. Now, in this move, Jiang Qiansong borrowed the power of Black Ghost in an instant. The ultimate defense and the ultimate attack were infinitely close to a perfect integration. Jiang Qiansong had no knife in his hand. But as his fingers pointed out, the void collapsed in an instant, and the earth was torn apart inch by inch. The ferocious gully in the earth continued to spread and twist on the surface. The destructive power once again formed a black tide shining with a dark luster. The black tide overturned everything. In Jiang Qiansong's sight, he and Black Ghost once again joined forces to attack with all their might, directly covering every inch of space around Li Tianlan and Qin Shilai. Power vibrated everywhere, destroying all matter. Qin Shilai wanted to buy time. Li Tianlan wanted to buy time. In such a situation, the longer they delayed, the more advantageous it would be for them. But Jiang Qiansong didn't want to waste time. Therefore, he used the most realistic expression to express his anger, and at the same time, forcefully borrowed strength. This was a sneak attack. Without any warning, the killing intent covered the sky and covered the earth in an instant. Li Tianlan did not move. Qin Shilai did not move. Even the troops of Shenyuan's sword standing quietly near the castle did not move. The monstrous power swept over Li Tianlan and Qin Shilai. This was an almost unstoppable attack. Blood spurted out from their bodies. The famed sword shattered inch by inch. Qin Shilai's body was completely distorted by the power and exploded into a bloody mist all over the sky. Falling star fell to the ground. Li Tianlan's body shattered bit by bit with blood. The monstrous power obliterated the geniuses, obliterated the sword saints, and slowly dissipated. The expression on Jiang Qiansong's face relaxed a little. The black tide completely passed. The night sky became silent again. Then, in the other direction, Jiang Qiansong drove to Qin Shilai and Li Tianlan. Qin Shilai stood there, still unrestrained and wild. Li Tianlan's eyes became more and more scarlet, looking extremely strange. When the black tide swept in front of the two of them, they did not dodge at all, but seemed to have never moved at all. Jiang Qiansong's brain went blank for a moment. He didn't know what was going on. Qin Shilai looked at Jiang Qiansong quietly, as if he were looking at an idiot. Everyone in the castle was also looking at Jiang Qiansong. They also looked at him as if they were looking at an idiot. In everyone's sight, Jiang Qiansong just reached out and pointed to the space in front of him, and then there was an earth-shattering blow. But the direction covered by that blow was at least 50 meters away from Qin Shilai and Li Tianlan. That was an indescribable picture. In such a serious and cruel battlefield, as this blow fell, it became a little embarrassing. Jiang Qiansong's hand still kept pointing forward. He raised his arm and didn't say anything for a while. Qin Shilai tilted his head, thought for a moment, and then said slowly, "Oh, did you miss the target just now?" He held the edge in his hand. "Do you want to sneak an attack? Your aim is too bad. Are your eyes not working well because you're old?" A mouthful of blood flowed down Jiang Qiansong's chest into his throat, and he swallowed it. His face really turned livid, and his mood became extremely irritable. Looking at Qin Shilai, he gritted his teeth and said, "Hypnosis." This was the most likely possibility, although this speculation was also incredible. Hypnosis? Qin Shilai twitched the corner of his mouth. In the silent night, Jiang Qiansong clearly saw a trace of frivolity in the curve of his mouth. Ancestor Linglong. The Dark Sword Master, who was famous in Eastern Europe, said lightly. There was a touch of doubt in Jiang Qiansong's eyes. It had been too long. He didn't know who Linglong was at all. But Li Tianlan understood in an instant. The founder of the Lin clan, who created Zhuanyuantai, was named Xianyuan. As for his wife, she was Ling Long. Hundreds of years ago. She was the first person from Zhongzhou state who could rival the Western Pope in the spiritual domain. The spiritual domain was broad and profound. The so-called hypnosis could only be said to be a part of the spiritual domain. There was no realm in this domain, or there was only one realm. The transcendent realm. Now, in the world, only the Pope could reach this realm in the spiritual domain. Qin Shilai had not reached the transcendent realm in the spiritual domain, but he used a little trick to deceive Jiang Qiansong's perception in an instant. It was not easy, but it was not as difficult as climbing to the sky. Jiang Qiansong took a step back calmly. Crossing the sea by deception and stealing the sky for another day were both the essence of the 30-meter mortal world. Whether it was borrowing power or being borrowed power, it could be said to be exquisite and unparalleled. But such a unique skill also needed to pay a big price. He and Black Ghost tried their best twice. To reach the realm that was infinitely close to perfection, they needed to pay more physical strength than in the normal state. The first blow did not kill Li Tianlan. The second blow became an extremely embarrassing joke. Now he and Black Ghost were no longer in their peak state. What they needed to face now was the Dark Sword Master Qin Shilai in his heyday, Li Tianlan in a seriously injured state, and at least 100 super elites of Xianyuan Sword and Rekvia Castle. There was still a chance of winning. But the risk had vaguely exceeded the bottom line that Jiang Qiansong could bear. He was famous for his defense. What he hated most was radical, and what he liked most was stability. But the current situation was not right. Should he advance or retreat? Li Tianlan and Qin Shilai did not give Jiang Qiansong a chance to hesitate. Li Tianlan took the initiative to break the delicate silence. He glanced at Qin Shilai and said calmly, "Can you?" Qin Shilai was stunned for a moment. In his sight, Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, was particularly red. "It's no problem to pester Jiang Qiansong," he said slowly, "but can you do it?" Li Tianlan did not speak. He was not a talkative person. On the battlefield, he did not like nonsense. His muscles were completely tightened, and his body was still bleeding, but the speed of bleeding was much slower. He stepped out and went directly to Black Ghost. Black Ghost narrowed his eyes. He opened his mouth and felt that he should say something. As soon as he said the first word. But Li Tianlan, who had no intention of delaying time, did not say a word. He did not even slow down. The first step fell. Then the second step. Boom! The ground of the entire castle shook with a loud rumble. The echo of Black Ghost was still spreading, but there was no shadow of Li Tianlan and Black Ghost in everyone's sight. The wind all over the sky suddenly whistled. It was as cold as a knife. Black Ghost's body tightened in an instant. In his sight, there was only a pair of scarlet and crazy eyes. It was a pair of eyes without any sense or extra emotion. The strange red light was flickering slightly. The attacks like a storm broke out in an instant. There was only violence. There was only madness. This was also a unique skill. But it was a unique skill that Black Ghost was not familiar with. This unique skill came from the weakest martial arts force in Zhongzhou state in recent decades. Azurapath. Li Tianlan had not had much contact with Azurapath. But he had contacted Hua Qingfeng, the shadow sect master who split from Azurapath. For decades, the reason why Azurapath was so hostile to the shadow sect was that, in addition to Hua Qingfeng's departure from Azurapath, the most important reason was that Hua Qingfeng also took away the most quintessential unique skill of Azurapath. Insane Devil. Chapter 438. The Wang family of Beihai could stand at the peak of martial arts for hundreds of years because they had the 6 paths of reincarnation, which was known as the ultimate outbreak of the world. In the days when the Li family had not fallen from the altar, It was also recognized by the world as the best in kendo because the last 3 ultimate swords of the 24 moves of sword was unparalleled. Azura Path had been glorious. In terms of time, Azura Path existed in Zhongzhou State even before Mount Shu. At the peak of Azura Path, their master had also been at the top of the divine list and stood beside several experts at the peak of the invincible realm without being at a disadvantage. That was a long time ago. That amazing figure had completely perfected the martial arts of Azura Path and pushed Azura Path to the peak of the Dark World when he was alive. Every martial arts force, more or less, sooner or later, must have its own essence as long as it could be inherited. The essence of Azura Path was only one move. Daoist madness. Now the essence of this move was not in the hands of Azura Path. It was in the hands of Hua Qingfeng, the master of the Shadow Sect. Now it was in the hands of Li Tianlan. To some extent, Daoist madness was worthy of its name. This unique skill was completely strange and domineering. The extremely strange way of exerting force and the absolutely violent way of accumulating force finally resulted in the madness and domineeringness of losing all reason. Martial arts madness exerted force at the end of the spine. This move had existed for hundreds of years, and there was still no unique skill in the Dark World that first exerted force here. Exerting force from the end of the spine and connecting the upper and lower limbs, the violent accumulation of force at that moment not only brought absolute power, but also pain that was enough to drown all reason. This way of exerting force brought almost permanent damage to the spine. Not only did it burn one's potential, but it was also cruelly destroying one's own body. Before hurting the enemy, he hurt himself first. The craziest and most tragic unique skill. But it was enough to make Li Tianlan completely burst out incredible combat capability in an instant. Dual wind and thunder veins were almost half destroyed in today's battle. But even if they were really half destroyed, Li Tianlan still had wind and thunder veins. The moment his spine tightened, his limbs were directly stretched to the limit in the process of blood burning wildly. Li Tianlan's eyes had no luster except for the scarlet killing intent. The boundless pain almost ignored all of his willpower and completely drowned his reason in an instant. The world seemed to have disappeared. All the sounds were getting further and further away. There were only flowing sounds in Li Tianlan's ears. It was neither gentle nor slow, but extremely violent, like boiling magma surging violently. It was the sound of his blood burning. At this moment, Li Tianlan had lost his mind. However, his body was exceptionally awake. Black Ghost was particularly clear in his eyes, and vaguely seemed to have become his only goal. All of his judgments were unprecedentedly swift and clear. This is not the judgment of the brain. It was instinct. It was the most terrifying, most natural, and most ferocious instinct. This kind of reaction speed had almost surpassed everything else. And all the attacks, dodging, advancing, and retreating made by such extreme reaction speed had another famous name in the Dark World. Night walking. It was the strongest body movement recorded in the Invincible Manual of the Catalogue of God of War of the Li family and the Lin clan. Li Tianlan gave up reason and relied on instinct. In a battle where he didn't need to consider other factors, this was almost his most perfect state at present. His taut bones continued to crackle, sounding like a dragon's roar. Martial Dao Berserk, Night Walking, Dragon Fist. Close combat, burning his potential in exchange for great combat power, the fastest reaction speed, the most ferocious attacks. In this state, Li Tianlan was completely fearless. Every cell in his body seemed to be roaring to support his craziest fight. Black Ghost kept retreating in his sight. The dark knife light merged with the night. The sound of the wind became violent in an instant. The figures of Li Tianlan and Black Ghost drew closer again at the moment when they were pulled apart. The knife light slashed on Li Tianlan. The broken clothes of Cloud Silk became more and more damaged. The moment the blood splashed, Li Tianlan, who had entered the best attack distance, became completely violent. Fire appeared in Black Ghost's pupils. There was thunder. The orange and blue colors flickered for a moment. The next second, the flames and thunder all turned into a strange pale white. The turbulent energy did not spread, but condensed to the limit, turning into extremely pale and demonic white spots. The white spots seemed to be suddenly pressed down before they were completely formed. Violent wind and rainstorm. In an instant, Black Ghost's eyes were full of attacks. In the dragon's roar, which was not grand but almost deafening, Li Tianlan's body had completely become a phantom that could not be captured by the naked eye. His body was there, but he was moving. Straight punch, uppercut, elbow strike, knee hit, leg sweep, roundhouse. In addition to the speed, Black Ghost only felt the extreme power. Retreat. Black Ghost could only retreat. His defense was extremely poor. Under such power, he could hardly bear any of Li Tianlan's attacks. And Li Tianlan in this state, Black Ghost believed that he could not bear any of his attacks either. But the problem was that Black Ghost had no chance to attack at all. Li Tianlan gave up all his defenses in exchange for the most violent attack. In this state, Li Tianlan also had no defense. Both of them had no defense. One of them attacked wildly. One of them dodged. This was a real life and death fight. Both of them were looking for opportunities. The moment the stalemate was broken, it must be a clear life and death. Jiang Qiansong stared at the battle between Li Tianlan and Black Ghost. His heart kept sinking. He had never thought that Li Tianlan, who was seriously injured to this extent, could still have enough combat power to suppress Black Ghost in an instant. Li Tianlan was not Black Ghost's opponent. The current suppression could only be described as a stalemate. But no matter how strong Black Ghost was on paper, in a real battle, his lack of defense would become a great variable. What Jiang Qiansong hated most was variables. The Jiang family of South America lost Jiang Xianxia 3 years ago. Today, they lost Jiang Qianyan again. In any case, Black Ghost must be alive. Otherwise, how could the Jiang family of South America, supported by him alone, expand in the future? And the death of Black Ghost meant that the layout of the Jiang family of South America in Eastern Europe had completely failed. All the current situations would be completely changed. Such a change, in addition to making Li Tianlan rise completely in the dark world, was also an absolute disaster for the Jiang family of South America. Jiang Qiansong took a step back subconsciously. In the current situation, he no longer thought about how to win, but had begun to think about how to retreat with Black Ghost. His footsteps just moved. An indescribable sense of oppression had come from all directions. Black Ghost completely disappeared in front of him. There was only light in Jiang Qiansong's world. The light was continuous and filled the surroundings, like a wildfire burning the sky, like a thunder that could destroy the world. The 100 elites of Xianyuan's sword troop were still silent. But at the same time, they attacked with all their strength. 100 experts with average strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. Such a team meant that there were at least 30 thundershocking realm experts. 30. Only real behemoths like the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan could have such a scale of power. Qin Shilai's figure also disappeared in the dazzling light. But the sword light of Sharp Edge, which was famous in Eastern Europe, was surging. The dark sword master hid in the darkness again outside the light. His voice sounded in Jiang Qiansong's ear with killing intent. It was extremely clear. You will die today. Chapter 439. Everyone understood. From the moment Jiang Qiansong, the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, and Black Ghost stood in the castle of Rekvia, the castle, known as the strongest war fortress in Eastern Europe, had been doomed. So Rekvia had already reached a consensus at the beginning of the battle. The castle was the foundation of Rekvia. But for the survival of the family, it was time to abandon the castle now. Tostel, who temporarily controlled Rekvia as a usurper, handed over the control of the castle and all system passwords to Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud of Sai City at the beginning of the war. This was a deal. Tostel handed over the complete control of the castle in exchange for the patriarch of Rekvia, his biological brother Schenker. In such a situation, such a deal, neither side felt that it was a loss. All the experts of the Rekvia family assisted Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud to start the weapon. But Tostel had already begun to transfer the important members of the Rekvia family at the beginning of the battle. 500 meters below the castle, there was an extremely well-hidden refuge. There was a secret passage in the refuge. Through the passage that cost a lot of money, a small number of important members of Rekvia could directly reach a small town less than 6 kilometers away from the castle. There were helicopters with special permissions in Wulan State parked in the small town. Taking the helicopter, they could reach all corners of Reki City in less than 20 minutes. This passage was very suitable for retreat. But in a way, it was also very suitable for invasion. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud stayed in the control room of the castle. Cool Breeze stared at the battle in the castle, while Drifting Cloud stared at Tostel, who was retreating from the passage. The control room of the castle was very large. It looked extremely solemn on weekdays. But the battle between the experts of the Invincible Realm not only destroyed the front part of the huge castle, but also the main structure of the entire castle had been seriously damaged. At this moment, the shrill alarm kept echoing in the control room. The big screen in the center reflected the battle in front of the castle, but more screens had been garbled, which meant that there were signals of failure or even complete damage in different areas of the castle. At present, the castle is seriously damaged. Cool Breeze said in a calm tone, the 3rd and 4th defense facilities have been completely destroyed, and the 5th defense is out of order. It will take at least 8 hours to repair, and this battle. He paused for a moment. In other words, in this battle, this seemingly intimidating castle can't be counted on? Drifting Cloud shook his head. The strongest fortress in Eastern Europe, an ancient castle that can deter Invincible Realm experts, is this what it looks like? Not everyone is Jiang Qiansong. Cool Breeze smiled bitterly. If it were an Invincible Realm expert tonight, even if the governor came in person, the laser and the destroyer in front would be enough to seriously injure the governor. Once this so-called fortress encountered a tortoise shell like Jiang Qiansong's, its role would indeed be reduced a lot. And tonight, before Qin Shilai came here, there were 3 Invincible Realm experts fighting. In such a battle, what can an ancient castle do? He took out a cigarette, lit it, and suddenly said, "And what can we do here?" Lu Yun fell silent. They were top assassins in Zhongzhou State and even in the Dark World. Assassins didn't need to defend themselves. There was no clear division of professions in the Dark World, but different paths had different directions. An assassin was like a knife in the dark, killing without leaving a trace and killing with a single strike. However, in a battlefield where one had to face the enemy head-on, the role of an assassin was infinitely close to zero, because they had no defense. Not to mention intervening in the battle of the Invincible Realm. Even on the battlefield where tens of thousands of elites fought, the living space of 1 or 2 assassins at the peak of the thundershocking realm would be greatly compressed. The current situation was already very clear. The ancient castle of Rekvia couldn't do anything. It was also useless for Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud to stay here. In a head-on confrontation, they couldn't even stop the moves of several Invincible Realm experts. Even if they found the best opportunity, they needed to fight for that possibility at the cost of their lives. Cool Breeze took a big drag on his cigarette and suddenly said, "It's almost time." The 2 of them knew very well that it was of little use to stay here. Li Tianlan naturally knew it. According to the plan, after the castle couldn't play a role, the 2 of them should follow the important members of Rekvia to Reki City as soon as possible. But the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. The planned castle couldn't play a role after all the energy was exhausted and all the weapons couldn't be used. Instead of being completely destroyed by the battle of several people. "It's time to go," Drifting Cloud said blandly. Cool Breeze raised his eyebrows. "Go." He glanced at the screen in the center of the control room. The screen was full of light. Hundreds of super elites of Shenyuan sword were advancing layer by layer. The sharp sword energy soared into the sky and tore the sky. On the battlefield between Li Tianlan and Black Ghost, the space was constantly twisting and exploding. Nothing could be seen. The situation was unclear. Were they leaving? "This is His Highness's order." Drifting Cloud looked down at the positioning device on his wrist. That was the tracker he left on Tostel. They have arrived at the refuge, about 4 kilometers from the exit of the passage. Drifting Cloud's tone became calmer. There's nothing for us to do here. We must enter Reki City at this time and prepare for His Highness's follow-up arrangements. Cool Breeze glanced at him and nodded. Let's go. Drifting Cloud chuckled and finally glanced at the screen where the battle was extremely fierce. 26 people. I guess we have to act separately. Almost at the same time, a private helicopter entering from Snow Country slowly approached the sky over Reki City. Reki City, which was already in a state of martial law, reacted very quickly. As soon as the signal of the private helicopter was captured, the armed helicopter of Reki City's military had already rushed over fiercely. This is the airspace of Wulan State. You have entered the airspace under martial law. Please show me your identity. The majestic voice came out through the loudspeaker on the armed helicopter. However, before the military of Wulan State repeated it for the second time, a female voice had already sounded on the private helicopter without any weapons. It was a very authentic English pronunciation. The voice was very pleasant to hear, but it was extremely cold and indifferent. I'm King Tong. King Tong Irene Wang Rothschild. I'm entering Reki City now. Get out of the way. Clear, brief, straightforward, and domineering. King Tong, the Grand Duke of England. But everyone knew her other identity. The Queen of the Shadow Throne, who ranked 11th on the World Divine List. The military helicopter of Wulan State suddenly fell silent. The silence lasted no more than a minute. There seemed to be an urgent report on the helicopter. Then several helicopters turned in silence and flew to Reki City. The helicopter of the Queen of Shadows also flew to Reki City. The Queen sat in the cabin and looked at the armed helicopter that was getting farther and farther away. Her smile was a little cold. There was no doubt that the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance had made Rekvia, one of the 4 major families in Eastern Europe, completely out of control. Rekvia's loss of control also meant that Wulan State was out of control. In the surging general trend, the Jiang family of South America, Zhongzhou State, and Rothschild were already involved. The only thing Wulan State could do at this time was to wait and see and wait for the final winner. The chaos in Eastern Europe stemmed from the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance. In the final analysis, it actually stemmed from the interest entanglement between the 4 major families. As one of the 4 major families, the Rekvia family lacked an invincible realm expert, so it naturally became the most important breakthrough point in the chaos in Eastern Europe. In the chaos in Eastern Europe, whoever could occupy Rekvia and Reki City would basically prove who would be invincible in Eastern Europe. King Tong stood up straight. The wind and rain over Reki City had stopped. The night was hazy and silent. It was an ordinary day. It was a turbulent day. From the perspective of later generations, this day was enough to be recorded in the history of all of Eastern Europe. Because in this chaos that was enough to affect the general trend in Eastern Europe for hundreds of years, this day was unanimously regarded as the beginning of the whole chaos by later generations. In the chaos before the arrival of the trial day, this day was called the Day of Death. Chapter 440. Killing intent was everywhere. There were battles everywhere. The entire Rekvia castle was constantly shaking in the fierce battle. Light and darkness. Domain and sword light. Thunder and raging fire. Fighting and blood. And order and chaos. Dark Sword Master Qin Shilai was indeed no match for Jiang Qiansong in terms of hard strength. The first on the holy list could barely break Jiang Qiansong's defense. However, hundreds of super elites of Shenyuan swords supported him from all directions. The infinite thunderbolts and sword intent formed one complicated and changeable sword formation after another. Qin Shilai naturally became the center of the sword formation. He restrained most of Jiang Qiansong's attacks with his own strength. The attacks of hundreds of super elites roared in the night sky. This process was doomed to be dangerous, but it was the most formal way of fighting. It was formal and effective. The dense offensive like the waves and the sea held Jiang Qiansong in place. Jiang Qiansong still maintained his defensive domain. His face was a little pale. He was dealing with the attacks of Qin Shilai and hundreds of elites of Shenyuan sword with all his strength. He had no time to take care of Black Ghost. Black Ghost also did not have the mind to think about Jiang Qiansong's situation. Jiang Qiansong was fighting in a very formal way. But he was in complete chaos. Africa was chaotic. Black Ghost, who came out of the death training camp in Africa, could be said to be the king of chaos. But Black Ghost had never experienced such a battle. Madness, precision, swiftness, keenness, hysteria, desperation. In the case of one-on-one, Li Tianlan's sudden outbreak was completely with a spirit that completely ignored life and death. The illusory space continued to shatter and explode as Li Tianlan moved forward. Black Ghost tried his best to dodge and looked for opportunities to fight back. But all the counterattacks were suppressed. Li Tianlan, whose essence, qi, and spirit were fully condensed, instinctively reacted faster than Black Ghost. Black Ghost's counterattack was getting less and less. Many times, when his arm just moved, before he had time to lift it, the roaring dragon fist with sword intent had completely blocked all his possible attack routes. As soon as his knife light was raised, Li Tianlan had already appeared one step ahead of him in the most inconvenient place for him to attack. In this state, Li Tianlan had completely become the most difficult opponent Black Ghost had encountered since his debut. He could see the limits of Li Tianlan's strength. After all, the combat power of the invincible realm was not the real invincible realm. The strength of Black Ghost was definitely above Li Tianlan. But the problem was that defense was his greatest weakness. If his defense was also at the level of the invincible realm, he could take 2 attacks from Li Tianlan at the risk of being seriously injured, and then kill Li Tianlan in this state in an instant. But with his current defense, Li Tianlan's first strike would probably make him lose most of his combat power. In the case of insufficient defense and completely suppressed reaction speed, Black Ghost's attack power was enough to be on the divine list, but he couldn't play any of it in Li Tianlan's crazy attack. This had nothing to do with the level of one's cultivation. In this state, Li Tianlan's fighting style completely suppressed the special invincible realm expert like Black Ghost, who had no power to fight back. Black Ghost kept retreating. Li Tianlan had gone completely mad. The two of them entangled and left the battlefield of Qin Shilai and Jiang Qiansong in the shortest time. Between the chase and the escape, Li Tianlan completely crushed Black Ghost and rushed into the cracked castle. The chaotic battle in the castle seemed to pause for a moment. Then there was a loud bang. A large area of the entire castle collapsed and stones fell. In the smoke and dust all over the sky, the remaining castle kept shaking. The crazy fighting did not stop, and it continued to spread in the castle, farther and farther, as if to penetrate the entire castle. Jiang Qiansong's heart became more and more impatient. At this point, he thought he had seen the situation clearly, although he didn't want to admit it. But for the Jiang family of South America, tonight was a failure. At least with Shenyuan sword and Qin Shilai here, the possibility of him killing Li Tianlan was almost non-existent. It was also impossible for him to take down Rekvia tonight. In his perception, Black Ghost was getting farther and farther away from himself. The uneasiness in Jiang Qiansong's heart surged and grew stronger. His body suddenly retreated dozens of meters and took out a whistle from his pocket. Jiang Qiansong put the whistle to his mouth and blew hard. The extremely sharp whistle echoed between the mountains of the castle in an instant, bringing about layers of echoes. This was the whistle to summon Black Ghost. In other words, this was a signal to retreat. Although unwilling, at the critical moment, when the balance of life and death gradually tilted, Jiang Qiansong could only admit his failure. After tonight, the situation of the Jiang family of South America was destined to be precarious. But it was not completely hopeless. What even Rekvia didn't know was that the Jiang family of South America had an extremely hidden base 100 kilometers away from Reki City. The elites of the Jiang family of South America were also hidden there. As long as Jiang Qiansong and Black Ghost arrived there, even if they failed tonight, the Jiang family of South America could still save a chance to turn the tables. Jiang Qiansong blew the whistle, and the whistle became more and more shrill. In his mind, he had begun to plan how to use the hidden base to make a comeback. The base was less than 100 kilometers away from Reki City. At this distance, there were too many things to do. Jiang Qiansong will come here. When Reki City and even the entire Wulan state were under martial law, Qin Weibai, who should not have appeared here, was standing on a low hillside in a mountainous area nearly 100 kilometers away from Reki City, quietly looking at the rolling mountains in front of her. If he fails, this is his only choice. What if he wins? Lin Fengting suddenly asked. Qin Weibai glanced at him. It was possible before, she said slowly, but now Dunlan and Qin Shilai have met. What chance does Jiang Qiansong have? Lin Fengting smiled and did not ask the question in detail. He just looked at the mountainous area in his sight and asked, "Which mountain?" "Every mountain is the same. The entrance is on this mountain." It can be said that this is the largest and most secret base of the Jiang family of South America in Eastern Europe. However, the interior of the mountain has been reinforced by a special alloy that is hundreds of meters thick. If you want to enter the base, you need to go through 13 security checks. The mountains are connected but not connected. If you want to walk through the whole base without special permission, almost no one can do it by relying on brute force. Qin Weibai pointed at one of the lowest peaks. "You seem to know this place very well?" Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai and said meaningfully. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and whispered, "I've been here once, just once." She seemed to want to say something, but finally shook her head. "So, you have permission here?" Lin Fengting asked. "I don't." Qin Weibai shook her head. Lin Fengting frowned and thought, "This place is so abnormal. You don't have permission. Do you really want me to go in with brute force?" That was what he thought, so he asked directly. "We don't need to go in." Qin Weibai explained calmly, "I'm standing about 300 meters away from the base's cordon. This is the only way to enter the base. We just need to wait for Jiang Qiansong here." Lin Fengting still wanted to speak, but the phone suddenly rang. He took out his mobile phone and answered it. After saying a few words, he put down the phone. Qin Weibai glanced at him. According to reliable information, King Tong entered Reki City 20 minutes ago. The Vatican and Knights Templars entered Reki City 15 minutes ago. Qin Weibai's eyes flickered, but she did not speak. Lin Fengting said the most important piece of information: Tianzong has arrived in Eastern Europe, less than 20 miles away from Reki City. Qin Weibai's body suddenly tightened, and she subconsciously clenched her fists. Lin Fengting looked at her for a while and said slowly, "It's not too late to get there now." Qin Weibai was silent for a long time. Finally, she shook her head and said calmly, "Wait for Jiang Qiansong." In Reki City, Wang Tianzong doesn't dare to do anything to Tianlan. She said softly, "So, wait here." "Is this place so important?" Lin Fengting couldn't help asking. "It's not important here. But Jiang Qiansong is important. If he's willing to cooperate with me, I'll give him a unique skill." Qin Weibai said calmly. But Lin Fengting frowned. Qin Weibai smiled lightly and said simply, "Because I want to live." Chapter 441. Qin Weibai wanted to live. This could be said to be the most comfortable sentence Lin Fengting had heard since he entered Eastern Europe. To some extent, standing by Samsara Palace was almost equivalent to standing at the highest point of the chaos in Eastern Europe. Because of the chaotic war in the Dark World, the chaos in Eastern Europe was all led by Samsara Palace. The Dark World had been noisy and bloody for more than 3 years. Samsara Palace had participated in it and quietly promoted the situation. Finally, the general trend had become the current situation. And it was not the military counselor of Samsara Palace who planned all this. It was Qin Weibai. It was not that no one in the Dark World had noticed the actions of Samsara Palace. But in the changing general trend, even if some discerning people had found some clues, they had long been unable to stop it. No one knew what Samsara Palace wanted. And as the situation developed, no one knew what Samsara Palace wanted. Or no one dared to believe it. Because from all the signs, no matter what the final chaos in Eastern Europe was, Samsara Palace was destined to be destroyed. Was the layout that took more than 3 years to destroy itself? How funny was that? Lin Fengting did not find it funny. But he could not describe this approach. Was it affection? Was it guilt? Or was it similar to a kind of sick sustenance? He could not evaluate it. But standing at his height, he could already see the ending in advance. Qin Weibai's tendency to self-destruct was too obvious. That emotion was so obvious that it had even infected the entire Samsara Palace. Anyone who was qualified to participate in this game could almost see it. But Lin Fengting did not want Qin Weibai to die in vain. Knowing Qin Weibai's origin, he could naturally understand why Lin Su had said that Qin Weibai was related to the future prosperity of the Lin clan. That was why Lin Fengting followed Qin Weibai. If Qin Weibai died, then everything he was doing now would be meaningless. And the most important problem was that Qin Weibai wanted to die. Lin Fengting had been calm on the surface, but he had long been troubled in the dark. He was now at the peak of the invincible realm, standing at the top of the dark world. But under the general trend of the entire dark world, even if his sword intent was superb, he did not know how to protect Qin Weibai, who wanted to die, in the midst of countless enemies. Now Qin Weibai wanted to live. This was undoubtedly the best news. Jiang Qiansong was known as Black Turtle in the dark world, and his defense was unparalleled. If Samsara Palace could cooperate with Jiang Qiansong, it could greatly increase Qin Weibai's chances of survival. But the premise of all this was that Li Tianlan and the Jiang family of South America must win the battle. Only in this way could the desperate Jiang family of South America have the possibility to cooperate with the Samsara Palace. Lin Fengting glanced at Qin Weibai and thought, "Are you so confident that Li Tianlan can win?" Qin Weibai stood on the hillside in front of her. The night wind was blowing, and the wind blew up the hem of her windbreaker. Her hands were in her pockets, and her body was straight. She looked proud and lonely. In Lin Fengting's vision, there was only an exquisite and dreamy side profile. She looked up at the starry night sky with a worried look in her eyes. Worried about Li Tianlan? Lin Fengting asked in a gentle voice. Qin Weibai shook her head and suddenly said, "Who do you think His Highness is behind the follower?" Lin Fengting was stunned. Being able to drive a super expert close to the peak of the invincible realm, the strength of His Highness was self-evident. But as for who exactly it was, not a single clue. Lin Fengting shook his head and said slowly, "There must be a clue, but we haven't found it yet." Qin Weibai shook her head. Lin Fengting suddenly understood something. "Is it because of the appearance of His Highness that you want to live? How dare I die when such a person exists?" Qin Weibai said calmly, "I don't know who he is, but I can be sure of his origin. Before he appeared, I didn't think anyone in the dark world was my opponent. Wang Tianzong is very strong, deity is extreme, and the Lin clan is huge. But whether it's you, Wang Tianzong, or deity, you all have the limitations of this era. I can't defeat you, but I have plenty of ways to make you powerless." Her voice was cold and piercing, like the wind blowing from the polar region to Eastern Europe. But this so-called His Highness is different. He has no limitations. If I die, Tianlan will not be his opponent. This has nothing to do with talent and aptitude. Some advantages can never be made up for. Is it because of Tianlan that you want to live? Lin Fengting said softly. Qin Weibai did not speak. This question was meaningless. Have you ever thought about how you will face him in the future? Lin Fengting pondered for a moment and finally asked this question. Qin Weibai was still silent, but her body was a little stiff. There were lonely stars in the night. The cold moonlight fell down and shone on her face. Her face was pale and almost transparent. Lin Fengting sighed quietly. Everyone had their own world. That was the whole meaning of life in the world. Qin Weibai's world was Li Tianlan. Only Li Tianlan. But she had no face to face her own world. "I will find him out," Qin Weibai said softly. In her mind, Li Tianlan might have many opponents. But only the mysterious highness was Li Tianlan's strongest opponent. That kind of advantage would almost make Li Tianlan have no chance of winning. She would find him out. As for what would happen after that, she did not say. Lin Fengting did not ask. I will go to see the follower in the near future and ask him for the list. Qin Weibai said suddenly. That's meaningless. Some important characters will definitely not be recorded. If the list is all, you can easily lock the identity of His Highness through that list. He won't be so stupid. Lin Fengting frowned. I have to take a look at it. Qin Weibai said softly, and it's not the only way. Lin Fengting said in a doubtful tone. The best way is to wait. If everything goes well in the end of the chaos in Eastern Europe, it will be an opportunity for him, an opportunity that I can't make up for at all. I may still not know who he is, but according to his reaction, I can determine his strength. Qin Weibai said calmly, if he doesn't appear in Eastern Europe, it's almost certain that he hasn't entered the invincible realm yet. Lin Fengting opened his mouth. The answer was a little unexpected, but when he thought about it, it didn't seem surprising. He lit a cigarette in silence and said nothing. Qin Weibai quietly looked at the silent mountains. This was the place where a long time ago, that incomparably pitiful man had massacred everyone for the sake of that hateful woman. Qin Weibai smiled. Her eyes were cold and calm without any temperature. The moonlight gathered on her. She raised her palms and looked at her hands. Her palms were slender, delicate, and extremely small. Compared with the whole of Eastern Europe, this hand was even more insignificant. But this was all her strength. Qin Weibai took a deep breath and stared at her palms. She would use all her strength and all her weapons to cover the sky of Eastern Europe, which was full of shadows. When the everlasting night passed and the polar sun rose, the whole dark world would inevitably enter a new era. Chapter 442. Even through the broken castle and the fierce fighting, Jiang Qianxong's whistle was clearly transmitted to Black Ghost's ears. Black Ghost heard the whistle that meant the signal to retreat, but he could not respond at all. For any aggressive combat unit, once it was suppressed in the battle, it often could not find a chance to turn over. And Black Ghost was not simply suppressed. His super attack power could not be exerted, his reaction speed could not keep up with the rhythm of the battle, and the shortcomings of weak defense were completely solved in the battle. Today, Black Ghost was completely crushed by Li Tianlan. Black Ghost could only retreat. Li Tianlan was between him and Jiang Qianxong. As a result, he kept running, and he could only get farther and farther away from Jiang Qianxong. The interior of the castle had been completely destroyed beyond recognition. The solid wooden stairs, the decorative armor, the bulletproof glass, the flower bed in the open air, the expensive furniture, and the electrical appliances had all been smashed. Huge cracks continued to spread on the walls. All the lights had been completely extinguished. There was no light in the castle, nor was there any light. Even the thunder and fire had completely disappeared. But the killing and fighting in the dark were getting crazier. All the power had been completely condensed by Li Tianlan. It did not spread, but concentrated to the apex. The subtle light often lit up in Li Tianlan's hands for a moment and then extinguished, and then became a crazy tide of power surging in the castle. Black Ghost kept dodging in the dark, but he could not get rid of Li Tianlan. The sound of the dragon fist broke the air in the darkness, and the sharp feeling of the space being torn came to his face. Black Ghost's retreating body moved 5 or 6 meters horizontally in an instant and rushed to the railing on the second floor of the castle. The roaring and surging power of the dragon fist drowned the multifunctional metal wall on one side. In the loud vibration, the wall collapsed completely. The light next door lit up for a moment and was directly destroyed by violence. The light shone for a moment. Black Ghost turned back in a hurry, but Li Tianlan's shadow was gone. Boom! In the time it took to turn around, the huge force had smashed all the railings on the second floor, and the broken objects were flying. Li Tianlan approached Black Ghost unreasonably and clasped his shoulders with both hands. At the moment when their bodies were close to each other, their forward and backward movements were already fast to the extreme. Li Tianlan pushed Black Ghost's body directly through the wall. The sound of stone collapsing was accompanied by the sound of metal covering. Black Ghost's arms instantly appeared with a layer of extremely fragile metal arm guards. Incomparably crazy attacks poured down like a torrential storm. Black Ghost had no time to pull out the knife. His arms shook together, and the moment the violent power gathered on his arms, the dragon roared. Black Ghost's fist, which was completely wrapped in metal, rushed out. Li Tianlan clenched his fist and slammed it on Black Ghost's arm guard. Blood splattered everywhere. Vaguely, Li Tianlan's fist had revealed his bones. The seemingly fragile but extremely tough arm guard was completely shattered by the punch. Black Ghost's body took advantage of the force to retreat, but as soon as his figure moved, the sense of deadly danger behind him was once again very close to him. The mournful whistle rang out again. Black Ghost became more and more anxious. The metal arm guard was already the third piece of life-saving equipment on his body. It should have been 3 opportunities to interrupt Li Tianlan's offensive and let him fight back, but Li Tianlan was getting crazier and crazier. Black Ghost didn't even dare to think about how serious Li Tianlan's current injury was. The fighting desire and aggression shown by the opponent was completely a madman. Regardless of everything, he went forward. No matter how serious the injury was, as long as he was not dead, he could continue to fight. Black Ghost stretched out his body. He was in the air, and his legs bounced lightly on the wall. He turned in an instant, trying to pass Li Tianlan and rush out of the castle. Li Tianlan rushed toward him. Black Ghost bounced in the opposite direction with the help of the wall. The figures of the two intersected for a moment. Black Ghost froze. At this moment, he didn't have time to figure out what it meant. In the violent loud noise, the wall behind him had suddenly collapsed. Li Tianlan turned back, and almost in the blink of an eye, he was in front of Black Ghost. Black Ghost did not hesitate and rushed straight forward. The instantaneous intersection had changed the position and direction of the two. Now in front of Black Ghost was the direction of Jiang Qiansong. Black Ghost was rushing. Li Tianlan was also rushing. The condensed and violent power completely exploded around Li Tianlan. Thunderbolts and raging fire condensed into white lines flashing in the darkness. The lines were intertwined in the castle, dense like a net. Li Tianlan waved the giant net in his hand and chased after Black Ghost frantically, almost occupying the entire mountain area. The huge and somewhat exaggerated castle kept bursting and collapsing, and the crazy destructive power raged in every corner of the darkness. Li Tianlan went all the way, and everything around him was shattered and collapsed. The whole castle had begun to crack, and it seemed that it would collapse at any time. The violent attack covered the castle in an instant, and the power spread like an inescapable net. Black Ghost kept dodging, moving forward and backward, and the distance between him and Jiang Qiansong became longer and shorter. The shrill whistle became more and more urgent. Black Ghost's heart was anxious and impatient, and his breathing became more and more rapid. Li Tianlan was the chosen one. But after all, he was not a real invincible realm expert. In this battle, he didn't feel the slightest majesty as an invincible realm expert. The other party just grasped one of his flaws, and then magnified it infinitely. This was a fighting style that just restrained him. He just needed a chance. A chance to block Li Tianlan's attack and then fight back in an instant. With his violent attack power that was enough to rank in the divine list, he could completely let the so-called chosen one fall here in the moment of the counterattack. He just needed a chance. Even if this chance was only for a second, or even half a second. The power that filled almost every inch of space was still surging. Black Ghost took a step forward. In this extremely delicate time, the shrill weight was still echoing. But the power that raged everything suddenly disappeared for a moment. Li Tianlan stopped where he was. In an instant, Black Ghost almost did not hesitate. He turned around and pulled out his knife. The knife light, which almost tore the world apart, solidified all the darkness in the castle in an instant. Li Tianlan's face was pale, and he looked up at the knife light. He knew that Black Ghost lacked a chance. So he gave Black Ghost a chance. The insanity devoured all his reason. In that state, Li Tianlan only knew to fight and did not guard against Black Ghost's change of direction. Now he changed his direction and rushed to Jiang Qiansong. Li Tianlan was not sure to break the stalemate between the two. At least he was not sure to break it before Black Ghost approached Jiang Qiansong. So he directly gave Black Ghost a chance. He took the initiative to stop, facing Black Ghost's strongest blow. The dark knife light was like a black arc in the night. Vaguely, Li Tianlan saw Black Ghost's eyes full of extreme violence behind the knife light. Li Tianlan smiled. The silver bracelet on his arm instantly turned into a silver long sword. Li Tianlan clenched the blade. He raised the sword to his eyebrows. In such a dark environment, no one would see this scene. Black Ghost would see the sword, but he would not have a chance to say anything again. The silver sword light lit up in the dark night. The sword light suddenly spread wildly in all directions. The silver light surrounded Li Tianlan like a ring. This sword intent was so illusory, not heavy, not sharp, and not even the slightest sharpness or aggressiveness. The light kept spreading, and the surrounding darkness frantically poured into the halo. The silver sword light became brighter and brighter. At this moment, Li Tianlan stood in the middle of the halo, and his figure was more real and clear than ever. The halo shone on the mess around, like a mirror, and even Black Ghost's knife light was clearly reflected. This scene was so familiar. It was especially so for Black Ghost. He suddenly opened his eyes wide. In an instant, his eyes were full of fear. It was not until this moment that he realized that his so-called need for a chance was not enough, far from enough. Li Tianlan raised the sword edge and closed his eyes. No one had seen his sword. In other words, before he truly feared no one, this sword should not have been known by the world. In the face of Jiang Chenyan's living with heaven and earth, Li Tianlan did not choose this sword when the situation was extremely critical. And now, the environment was just right, unknown. With this sword, Black Ghost must die. The blade of falling stars stabbed upwards with incomparable stability. This was his swordsmanship. In his swordsmanship, this sword might not be the strongest, but it was enough to bring the strongest fear to everyone. Li Tianlan had every reason to believe that if this sword was exposed now, Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, and even many people who were like enemies or friends or close to him would kill him at all costs. Because this sword represented a completely unknown path. It was the same as shattering, punishing heaven, and breaking the sea. This sword also had a name. Unparalleled style. Unparalleled in the world. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.